Robb Stark stood in the quiet twilight of the Whispering Wood, listening to the soft rustle of leaves and the hushed breathing of his men. It was well past dusk, and the hidden glens and winding paths of the forest were swallowed by the indigo shadows of night. Somewhere among those dark silhouettes lay the encampment of Tywin Lannister, the formidable lord of Casterly Rock and the man who commanded an army large enough to swallow half the realm. Robb's eyes flickered over the torchlit spaces between the trunks of ancient oaks, searching for any sign of movement, any glimpse of gold or crimson. The soft wind carried the scent of damp earth and dying leaves, a fleeting reminder that winter was never far from the minds of men in Westeros. In the weeks since crossing the Neck and calling his banners, Robb had proven himself resourceful and bold, though the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. He could still see the faces of the lords of the North and the Riverlands as he presented his plan to outmaneuver the Lannister forces. Too many remembered Eddard Stark, prisoner in King's Landing, and yearned to free him. Yet word had spread that his father faced charges of treason by Queen Cersei's decree, that the Iron Throne itself seemed complicit in a monstrous injustice. The fear of losing Ned to the executioner's sword forged unity as much as the heritage of the North did. This was no mere war for territory, it was an existential struggle to protect House Stark, to bring justice to the realm. When word reached them that Tywin himself approached from the east, Robb knew the moment for boldness had arrived. It would be no small feat to ambush the likes of Tywin Lannister. He was a man seasoned by countless campaigns, a figure known for his ruthless cunning and unstoppable will. Robb could almost feel the tension in the air each time the name was uttered. And yet the young wolf refused to cower. He was his father's son, heir to the traditions of the Kings of Winter, and whatever fear he felt, he would force it deep inside. You win or you die, he thought, remembering his father's urgent words. With a last glance at Grey Wind, who waited by his side, silent as a midnight shadow, Robb mounted his horse and signaled for silence. They had hammered out every detail of this plan. The outriders had mapped each patch of the forest, each snaking path, each subtle bend where horses might pass or men might stand concealed. He would divide his host, sending some to coax Tywin's van deeper into the gloom before cutting off any possibility of retreat. That was the risk. He would himself lead the vanguard that lured the Lannisters onward. It was as dangerous as any plan he had made. Yet if he succeeded, the advantage would shift so dramatically that the entire war could change in a single night. His men were prepared to trust him, in large part because of his victories against lesser Lannister captains and scouts. But Tywin was the greater test, the true measure of whether the young wolf could truly be a king in the North. He raised his hand in a swift gesture, and his men pressed forward, melting into the gloom. The tang of adrenaline sharpened every sense. In that moment, Robb recalled how his father had taught him the ways of honor and fair dealings, how his mother had schooled him in caution and courtesy, and how the threat of war had tempered all he was taught. This time, fair play would not help them, nor courtesy. The Lannisters had seized power in King's Landing, laid traps for his father, and threatened the Riverlands. Robb would fight them not as a naive boy but as a warrior waging war for survival. In the hush that followed, he heard the distant crackle of Lannister fires, saw their torches like a necklace of amber strung through the trees. The silhouettes of tents in the clearing below flickered. Somewhere among those tents lay Tywin Lannister in his command post, certain of his might, confident that the name Lannister would inspire fear in his foes. Robb guided his horse forward, flanked by his closest companions. Lord Roose Bolton rode on one side, his heavy-lidded gaze scanning the darkness. The Great John on the other side, fists clenched around his reins, as if he were ready to punch 100 Lannisters single-handedly. Farther behind was Ser Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, who had been indispensable in reading the land and managing the outriders. They halted near the place where they had agreed to commence the feint. Robb took a deep breath, pressed a gloved hand against Grey Wind's flank, and leaned forward in his saddle. With a nod to Bolton, he set the plan in motion. A handful of archers lit torches of their own and flung them ahead, arcing trails of fire that landed near the Lannister perimeter. Shouts rang out as the Lannister sentries reacted. Without hesitation, Robb spurred his horse and led a contingent of a few dozen men charging straight at the outer line. The shock of steel hitting steel split the night. The howls of frightened horses mixed with the roars of defiance. The chaos that erupted was precisely what Robb wanted, an immediate alarm that would drive the Lannisters into reaction rather than cautious planning. Robb fought like a man possessed, each swing of his sword a swift slash that forced Lannister footmen to give ground. He could hear Grey Wind's snarls, the dire wolf launching itself on unsuspecting soldiers, rending throats with savage efficiency. A part of Robb quailed at the bloodshed, but he hardened his heart, remembering that if Tywin prevailed, the cost to House Stark would be unimaginable. He led his men deeper, just enough to threaten the outer tents. Then he signaled a retreat, a staged fallback that would lure the Lannisters out of their defenses. The Lannisters, roused by the clamor, poured from tents half-armed or haphazardly donned in armor. Torches bobbed up and down, illuminating glimpses of red and gold surcoats, the golden lion rampant shining in the smoky glow. Robb caught a glimpse of Tywin's personal standard, but the Lord himself remained hidden somewhere in the swirling darkness. The Lannister foot soldiers advanced, forming ragged lines. Some knights tried to mount in time, but many were forced to chase on foot. And so the chase began. Robb and his company withdrew deeper into the wood, encouraging the Lannisters to follow like hounds on a scent. The forest was treacherous in darkness, twisting roots that threatened to trip the unwary, low-hanging branches that could dismount a rider, and uneven clearings that ended abruptly in slopes. Robb's archers had taken positions in the upper ridge, hidden from view. They let the first wave of Lannisters pass, ignoring them. It was Tywin's vanguard Robb wanted, the well-armored knights who would be determined to show their prowess by sweeping aside this northern rabble. As the wave of footmen and knights thundered deeper, the first volley of arrows rained down. Cries of pain and shock echoed. Horses reared and bucked, men tumbled, and the confusion played right into the Northmen's plan. Another volley, then another. By the time Robb's men in the rearguard turned to charge again, the Lannisters found themselves ensnared, pressed from front and rear while archers harried their flanks. In the thick of it, Robb spotted Lord Tywin's sullen face illuminated by the dull light of a lantern carried by one of his guards. The patriarch of House Lannister was astride a warhorse, clad in gilded armor that caught the glow of torches and moonlight alike. His pale green eyes darted around, calculating, assessing the emergent battlefield. Robb could sense Tywin's quick mind at work even under ambush. The old lion was no fool and would try to carve a path out. Yet Robb's plan relied on their advantage of terrain and the locked jaws of the trap. Once the Lannisters were surrounded, the only question would be whether the jaws would tighten quickly enough to prevent Tywin's escape. Grey Wind's howl cut through the bedlam. The great dire wolf lunged at a line of Lannister pikemen, scattering them in disarray. Meanwhile, Robb's cavalry, led by the Great John and the Blackfish, crashed into the flank of the Lannister line. The horses smashed through the lightly armed men, and the roars of triumph from the Northmen only further stoked the sense of dread among their foes. Robb advanced with singular determination, sword raised, guiding his men deeper into the press of bodies. Everywhere he looked, glints of metal clashed and men struggled in the mud and fallen leaves. He spurred his horse forward, weaving between thrashing limbs and swinging blades, searching for Tywin. It wasn't long before he found himself face to face with a knot of Lannister men-at-arms protecting their lord. Robb recognized the polished lion on the breastplate of one knight who barred his way. The knight's sword came at him with a swift overhead chop. Robb twisted in the saddle and parried, steel screaming against steel. Sparks lit the gloom like embers. Before the knight could recover, Robb reversed his blade and slashed across the man's unguarded side, sending him toppling from his horse with a cry. Another one rushed him from the right, but Grey Wind leapt, teeth snapping closed around the man's thigh, tearing him down with savage force. Tywin Lannister was there, glaring at Robb with silent fury. He had no time for words, only the lethal language of swords. Lord Tywin had been a warrior in his youth, and there was no hesitation in the swing of his blade. Robb met the blow with his own sword. Their blades collided in a flash of sparks, the impact jarring Robb's arms. The Lord of Casterly Rock lunged again, forcing Robb to pull back on the reins and shift in the saddle to avoid a stroke aimed at his chest. Robb's mind raced. He knew Tywin had spent decades commanding armies and crushing rebellions. Yet the old lion was also older in body, slowed by time, however imposing his presence. Robb seized an opening, swinging downward. Tywin parried, but the force of the blow almost knocked the blade from his hand. With a grunt, Tywin pressed forward, forcing Robb's blade aside. They traded two more swift strikes, steel biting into steel, the clang echoing. Sparks danced off in the darkness. Their horses neighed and snorted, pivoting at each shift of the riders. It was a precarious dance in which any slip meant sudden death. Robb saw in Tywin's fierce eyes the absolute resolve to kill him, to end the Stark line here. But the advantage was Robb's. The Lannisters were pinned, outmaneuvered. Tywin's concentration faltered for an instant when one of his knights galloped behind him, bellowing that their forces were overrun. Robb took the chance, lunging in a smooth motion. His blade found the gap between Tywin's breastplate and gorget. With a startled gasp, Tywin was rocked back in his saddle, blood spilling from the wound beneath the edge of his jaw. Tywin did not fall immediately. His eyes hardened, and he tried to raise his sword arm again as if by sheer will he might remain unbowed. Then the sword clattered from his grip. He toppled sideways off the horse, landing heavily upon the trampled leaves. Robb stared, breath catching in his throat. It felt unreal, this sight of the fearsome Tywin Lannister on his back, eyes wide and distant, blood soaked into his gilded armor. Around them the fighting persisted, but the center collapsed. Lannister men-at-arms, seeing their lord fallen, began to waver. Robb could sense the dismay rippling outward, demoralizing their ranks. The Greyjohn's bellowing laugh sounded over the din, and the Northmen surged like a wave swallowing a small boat in a storm. Before long, the last of the Lannister lines broke, fleeing deeper into the woods or trying to scramble back to the camp. Robb reined in his horse, leaning down to check Tywin's pulse, but the man was gone. Satisfaction flooded him, tempered by an odd sense of solemnity. This was the man who had orchestrated so much cunning in Westeros, who had forced the realm into submission many times, and who had threatened the very life of Robb's father. Now he lay lifeless on the forest floor. Robb sank into his saddle, exhaling a shaky breath. All around him, men in Stark colors let out roars of triumph. The old lion was dead, and the young wolf had slain him. The swirl of possibility that opened with Tywin's death roiled in Robb's mind. Had he just changed the course of the war in a single stroke? Some Lannister soldiers, still unaware of their lord's fate, continued to resist, but they were soon overwhelmed. A portion of Robb's men pursued them to ensure they wouldn't regroup. Others dragged the wounded from the field. Dying horses lay on their sides, blood pooling from wounds. The forest floor bore testament to the ferocious battle, littered with broken shields, dented helms, snapped arrows, and bodies in Lannister scarlet and Stark gray. The torches that remained stood as flickering sentinels, lighting the aftermath of a savage victory. It took much of the night to bring the chaos under control. The northern lords, bloodied yet unbowed, gathered around Robb, each wearing an expression that ranged from euphoric triumph to grim satisfaction. The Greatjon boomed a hearty laugh, proclaiming that the Lannisters would now be scattered like frightened hares. Lord Bolton observed Tywin's corpse with a calculating gaze, though he offered no smile of triumph. Ser Brynden Tully nodded respectfully to Robb, his gruff voice stating that they must be swift to capitalize on this victory. "They'll not remain confused for long," he said. "Tywin may be dead, but his bannermen will not simply melt away. You've gained an advantage, use it quickly." Robb nodded, his thoughts whirling. This was more than just a battle. It was a sign to all of Westeros the North would not be cowed. He closed his eyes, recalling the face of his father. Eddard Stark, now a hostage in King's Landing. If this victory gave Robb the leverage to demand his release or mount a swift rescue, then perhaps the deaths tonight were not in vain. He turned to the Greatjon and the others. "We gather our forces. Every man we can spare remains here to tend to the wounded and secure the prisoners. At first light, we ride for the twins again and ensure we have Walder Frey's support in crossing. If we move quickly, we can push on Harrenhal or even further south, forcing the Lannisters to deal with us on our terms." His voice carried the tremor of youthful excitement, but also the iron of resolve. He would see this through. The men voiced their agreement in a chorus of approval. They had believed in him enough to follow him into the Wolf's Maw of battle. Now they believed twice as fiercely. If Tywin Lannister, the man with the golden fists, could not withstand the young wolf, then who could? That night, the camp was alive with whispered conversations, cheers, and the hushed groans of the injured. Robb moved among the tents, meeting the eyes of those who had followed him, offering thanks or words of encouragement. He knew their loyalty might waver if they lost faith, so he gave of himself, acknowledging their courage, their sacrifices. In the background, the soft songs of the North drifted between the trees, telling stories of heroes past and the old kings in the North. Moonlight cast a silver glow across the clearing, and somewhere an owl hooted softly among the branches. Occasionally, the muffled sobs of the dying broke the quiet, reminding everyone that victory never came without cost. At dawn, the scale of their triumph became more evident. Scores of Lannister men had surrendered, kneeling in the half-frozen mud, stripped of their weapons. A handful of minor knights and lords had been captured. Some recognized Robb's authority with ill grace, others seethed silently. But with Tywin dead, they had little hope of organizing a rescue. Ser Kevin Lannister had not been with Tywin, so there was no second lion to rally the troops. Word would inevitably reach Cersei in King's Landing, perhaps even that day by Raven, that her father was gone. It was a thunderbolt that would rattle the capital. Robb allowed himself a moment to consider the ramifications. Queen Cersei might grow desperate or lash out. King Joffrey, her son, was a boy with a violent temper. That could mean Ned's life was in greater peril. Another reason to make haste. The northern host marched triumphantly out of the Whispering Wood, leaving the battered Lannister encampment behind. Crude burial mounds were fashioned for the dead, with a large pyre set for Lord Tywin's corpse at Robb's command. The man had been an enemy, but he was also a figure of renown in Westeros, and Robb wished to show that the North was not without respect for a fallen foe. Some of the Lannister knights had wept openly at the pyre, unbelieving that the pillars of House Lannister could ever fall. The smoke from that fire would be visible for miles, a dark beacon proclaiming that the tide of war had turned. As they traveled, lords of the Riverlands emerged from hiding and pledged anew to the Stark cause. They had been battered by the Lannisters for weeks, their villages burned, their small folk terrorized. Now, with Tywin's force scattered, they came with fresh determination. Ser Edmure Tully, having been freed from the threat at Riverrun, rode out to meet Robb on the road. His eyes shone with relief and amazement. "You've done what many thought impossible," he told his nephew. "You've slain Tywin Lannister in open battle. The banners of House Tully are yours to command. Riverrun will stand behind you to the last." At the edges of the gathering was Roose Bolton, ever watchful, ever reserved. He said little, but the mild smile that twitched at his lips suggested that even the Dreadfort had found cause to celebrate. The Great John, the Blackfish, even the lords of lesser houses like Glover, Serwyn, and Tallheart, each had stories to tell about how the Lannisters had buckled. Around the nightly fires, men told tales of how the Lannister charge had collapsed when they saw Robb Stark and his direwolf. They inflated the story with each retelling, painting it as if Tywin had cowered and tried to flee. Robb allowed them to celebrate but did not partake in exaggeration. He knew victory was a fleeting thing in war, ephemeral as the winter sun. The next challenge awaited, and it might be even more dire. Letters were dispatched to King's Landing, demanding Ned Stark's release. In them, Robb declared himself the rightful guardian of the North and warden of the Trident, proclaiming that if Ned Stark was not freed, the northern host would march to the gates of the capital itself. Did he truly intend to do so? It seemed mad, but with Tywin gone, a significant portion of the Lannister might was diminished. That left perhaps only the forces commanded by Jaime Lannister, who was still in the field somewhere near Riverrun or the eastern Riverlands, unless he had fled south. The key now was to press the advantage before the crown could reorganize under someone else's leadership. As they advanced, a trickle of fresh levies joined them, men from the Riverlands who had hidden from the Lannisters' foraging parties. The small folk cheered for the young wolf, some even calling him the king in the north. Robb tried not to let it go to his head. He recalled how quickly fortunes changed in the Game of Thrones. Yet the idea of kingship sparked in the minds of those around him. Men like the Great John were fond of telling him, "No more southern kings, we'll have our own." Over and over, Robb insisted his main goal was to rescue his father, secure his sisters, and ensure the safety of the North. But he could sense the shifting tide of sentiment. Northmen did not lightly bend the knee to outsiders. When they felt their trust had been broken. Late one afternoon, after a full day's march, Robb found himself gazing over the battlements of an old keep they had seized along the Red Fork of the Trident. The keep had been a Lannister foothold, lightly garrisoned after Tywin's passing. The men surrendered without a major fight once they learned the fate of their lord. Standing at the top of the parapet, Robb looked out at the wide green fields sloping away to the river. The spires of Riverrun stood in the distance. "If only father could see this," he said quietly to Grey Wind, who stood beside him, sniffing at the breeze. Ser Brynden Tully joined him. The Blackfish rested his hands on the stone parapet. He was a hard man with a stern face, but there was warmth in his voice. Your father would be proud, Robb. You've done more in these weeks than men thrice your age could dream. Robb dipped his head. I just want him free. And my sisters. I'd trade all these victories for their safety. He fingered the handle of his sword, the one he had used to strike down Tywin. It felt heavier each day. The Blackfish nodded. Aye. But we can't go back. The realm has changed. And you've changed with it. They stood in companionable silence. Dusk settled, casting a ruddy glow over the rolling farmland. From the courtyard below, the calls of men rummaging through storerooms echoed. The sense of a calm lull after a storm pervaded the keep. Robb wondered if this was the eve of another storm. Word would reach them soon from King's Landing, or from Jaime Lannister, or perhaps from Tyrell or Baratheon forces. He wondered if Stannis or Renly would move with this new development. So many uncertain threads converged in war. Yet amidst that uncertainty, confidence pulsed in the ranks. Men boasted that they had faced the fiercest lion in Westeros and prevailed. The unstoppable Tywin had been stopped and the Lannisters had retreated. Small wonder men looked at Robb with reverence. At supper that night, the Great John took one swig of ale too many and rose, bellowing, "Who is the rightful king of the North if not the son of Ned Stark, the man who bested Tywin the Terrible?" The hall exploded in cheers. Robb's cheeks burned. He tried to quiet them, but they toasted him long and loud, naming him the king in the north. A raven arrived 3 days later, bearing a message with the royal seal. The parchment was short and direct. It declared Ned Stark a traitor to the crown, repeated that he had conspired with the treasonous line of King Robert's brothers, and insisted that if Robb Stark did not bend the knee, Lord Eddard's life would be forfeit. There was no mention of Tywin Lannister, no sign of fear. Merely the same arrogance that had branded the Iron Throne's decrees since Joffrey was crowned. Robb's knuckles whitened on the paper. He imagined Joffrey's sneering face or Queen Cersei's cold smile behind those words. And now, with no Tywin in King's Landing to guide them, who wielded the real power? Perhaps Cersei and the Council of Sycophants. Robb had no illusions that they would show mercy. They would think him a rebel, and rebels were to be crushed unless he could force them to the negotiating table by fear or might. He read the letter aloud to his assembled lords in the main hall of the keep. Their anger was palpable. The Great John muttered curses under his breath. Roose Bolton's pale eyes flickered with something akin to amusement. The Blackfish's jaw tightened. Edmure Tully slammed a fist onto the wooden table. There was talk of pressing south immediately, of attacking Harrenhal or laying siege to King's Landing itself. But even in their zeal, they had to face reality. The capital's defenses were formidable and the Lannisters still held influence through the king. Renly and Stannis might harbor their own ambitions, perhaps even forging alliances. If the North marched alone, they could be pincered by multiple armies. Robb realized their best chance was to continue to exploit the shock of Tywin's death, claim more territory, and force a better bargaining position. That night, he sat in a candlelit chamber poring over maps with the Blackfish, Edmure, Roose Bolton, and others. They spoke of routes, of supply lines, of potential alliances. They debated the wisdom of forging an accord with the Baratheon brothers. Stannis was known for his stern sense of justice, but also for his unyielding pride. Renly had declared himself king not long ago, claiming popularity and the might of the Reach. It was a tangle of crowns. Roose Bolton suggested that if the North was to be its own kingdom, then forging alliances with either Stannis or Renly might only invite future conflicts. But Edmure pointed out that if they allowed the Lannisters to gather themselves anew under Jaime or Cersei, they might face a revived force that could hamper them for years. Robb listened, determined to choose wisely. He felt the presence of Grey Wind near him, an ever-watchful guardian. He wondered what his father would do. Honor told him to avoid alliances born solely of expedience, but the reality of war demanded cunning. He could not rely on courtesy from those who sat on the Iron Throne. He had bested Tywin in battle, but that alone would not save Ned's life. Eventually, they decided on a march to Harrenhal. Roose Bolton volunteered to spearhead the move to secure the fortress and cut off any attempt by Jaime's forces to regroup there. Meanwhile, Robb would lead the main host southwards, but only as far as the Blackwater Rush. He would test the defenses, see if King's Landing could be threatened enough to force negotiations. So they set their plan into motion. The northern host wound along the roads of the Riverlands like a gray serpent. The devastation left by the Lannisters was stark: burned farms, sacked villages, fields of blackened stubble. Whenever Robb's men came upon people hiding in barns or half-collapsed cottages, they offered what little provisions they could spare, promising that justice was at hand. Word spread quickly, and the small folk spoke of the young wolf with admiration, a break from the fear they had lived under. He had avenged them by striking down the man who orchestrated these raids. As days passed, the tension grew. Scouts reported that some of Jaime Lannister's forces were still at large near the Golden Tooth or along the northern edge of the Westerlands. The worry was that Jaime would try to unify the remaining loyal Lannister bannermen. Yet the blow of Tywin's death had fractured their morale. Some houses that once stood firmly behind the Lannisters began to hedge their bets, avoiding open confrontation or waiting to see which way the wind blew. Robb recognized that in the game of lords, few were truly loyal beyond their own survival. For now, he was content to let them linger in uncertainty. Then came a surprising piece of news. Scouts relayed that Jaime himself was not, in fact, heading to rally the Westerlands. He was believed to be marching toward Riverrun, perhaps to try and recapture the seat of House Tully. Robb had left an adequate garrison there under the command of his uncle Edmure, but it would be tested if Jaime brought enough men. Could Jaime be seeking vengeance for Tywin's death? Was the Kingslayer so driven by fury that he would risk meeting the northern host again? Robb quickly convened a war council, debating whether to push on or redirect his forces to crush Jaime once and for all. A day later, another raven arrived, marked with the sigil of House Tully. It was from Edmure, stating that Jaime's host approached, but he believed Riverrun could hold for a time. He requested swift reinforcements if possible. And so Robb made the choice. He would not delay. He would not let the Kingslayer slip away or threaten the seat of his mother's house. Summoning his lords, he commanded the main body of the army to pivot, turning westward to head back toward Riverrun. Harrenhal would have to wait. Roose Bolton, already on the road to Harrenhal with his own contingent, would continue his mission but now with fewer men. The forced march across the Riverlands was grueling. They pushed day and night, halting only for brief rests. The summer weather still lingered, muggy and hot, turning roads to churned mud when rain clouds gathered. Despite the discomfort, the men pressed on, driven by the sense that victory could be decisive. The possibility of capturing or killing Jaime Lannister, another key figure of House Lannister, filled them with an almost feverish determination. As they neared Riverrun, they began to see the outline of Jaime's camp on the horizon, spires of tents in the distance, the golden lion banners flying. They arrived at nightfall. In the orange glow of the setting sun, the walls of Riverrun glittered over the waters of the Tumblestone and the Red Fork. Jaime's host had dug in around the fortress, laying rudimentary siege lines. Robb's outriders crept close, counting tents, noting guard placements. It was not as large a force as Jaime had once commanded, but it still posed a formidable threat. Perhaps two-thirds the size of Robb's host. Under normal circumstances, Jaime might have had a chance to starve out Riverrun or force a pitched battle, but not now. Robb had arrived with more men, fresh from victory. They decided to strike at dawn, coordinating with Edmure, who would sally forth from Riverrun to catch Jaime's men between hammer and anvil. The tension that night was thick enough to taste. Robb slept in his tent, gray wind curled at his side, but sleep came fitfully. He dreamed of Ned, shackled in some dark cell, head bowed, calling out to him. He dreamt of Tywin's face frozen in death, the blood pooling around him. He awoke in a cold sweat, clutching at the furs. Gathering himself, he reminded himself that he must stay strong for the men who followed him, and for his family. Morning came at last, and the horns blew, summoning the men to arms. Dawn's pale light cast long shadows over the fields outside Riverrun. Robb mounted his horse, donned his armor, and raised his sword. The men formed ranks, brimming with confidence. The memory of Tywin's fall lingered like an omen. Jaime's men stirred at the sight, forming a line of their own, the gold lions set against the red fields. Robb could see Jaime in the distance, clad in gleaming steel, white cloak swirling around him despite the dust. Even across the battlefield, the Kingslayer's arrogance radiated from his posture. But Robb also glimpsed tension in how tightly Jaime gripped his reins. The ground shook as they charged. The initial clash was thunderous, spear points splintering against shields, horses screaming, men bellowing war cries. Robb's cavalry punched into the Lannister right flank with crushing force. Edmure's troops emerged from Riverrun's gates, crossing the drawbridge and slamming into the rear of Jaime's forces. Trumpets sounded from the ramparts, and a chorus of cheers erupted from Tully archers who rained arrows on the besiegers. The Lannister lines began to buckle under the coordinated assault. Robb maneuvered his horse with precision, cutting down one man-at-arms after another. He noticed the Great John leading a wedge of pikemen that tore into the center. On the other side, Bolton's men fought with grim efficiency, their flayed man banner drawing uneasy glances from friend and foe alike. Gray wind darted in and out of the chaos, sowing terror among the foot soldiers. Jaime Lannister met them head-on, shouting for his men to stand firm. Robb glimpsed flashes of Jaime's sword, weaving a deadly pattern. Jaime was one of the best swordsmen in Westeros, and even outnumbered, he carved a path with lethal grace. Yet the tide was against him. Men fell to the Northerners' fury. Arrows whistled from the walls, felling Lannister spearmen. It was only a matter of time before the encirclement became complete. Robb spurred his horse toward Jaime, eager to end this. Several knights in gold cloaks intervened, but Robb's men cut them off. Grey Wind lunged, pulling one knight from his saddle, biting into his exposed neck. Robb locked eyes with Jaime as they closed the gap. There was no fleeing in that gaze, only a fierce, almost joyful challenge. The Kingslayer lived for battle. They clashed, steel singing in the early light. Jaime's first strike was so fast Robb almost missed it. He parried just in time, feeling the impact jar his arm. Jaime pressed forward, unleashed a series of blows that forced Robb to retreat a step. But Robb was not alone, and the swirling chaos around them gave him opportunities. He ducked a slash from Jaime, then countered, forcing Jaime to pivot awkwardly. Another Northerner tried to assist, but Jaime slashed him across the chest in a single fluid motion. Robb pressed in again, blocking Jaime's blade, hooking it aside, then kicking out. Jaime stumbled, losing his balance just enough for Robb to aim a downward cut. Jaime rolled, and the blow glanced off his armor. With a snarl, Jaime regained his feet, sword raised. Blood trickled from his temple where he must have struck it against a rock. Surrender, Robb growled, breathing hard. Your father is gone. You cannot win this. Jaime spat at the ground. My father was unstoppable. But he said it with a note of confusion as though hearing it for the first time. You'll die as Ned Stark's heir should. He lunged again. Robb brought up his sword to block, feeling the raw strength behind Jaime's blows. The Kingslayer's skill was undeniable, but the ring of Lannister bodies around them told the bigger story. The Lannister host was collapsing. Riverrun's gates had fully opened, and Edmure's men were cheering wildly as they surrounded the remnants. Over the clamor, Robb heard the Greyjohn's voice rising, urging Jaime's men to throw down their arms. Some did. Others fought to the last. Jaime attacked with a savage overhand blow meant to cleave Robb from collarbone to hip. Robb angled his blade to deflect it, taking a step aside. His horse whinnied and sidestepped a corpse on the field. Jaime reeled from the force of the parry, and Robb struck back with a quick thrust. The tip of his sword found the crease in Jaime's armor near his left shoulder. Jaime hissed, stumbling backwards, his sword arm momentarily weakened. Robb seized the moment. He swung wide, aiming at Jaime's unguarded flank. Jaime managed to block it at the last second, steel shrieking against steel. The impact rattled Jaime, who fell to one knee. Blood seeped from Jaime's wounded shoulder, his breath ragged. Robb circled him, sword raised. Yield, he commanded, the final word echoing over the ring of metal and the cries of the dying. Jaime glared up, defiance in his eyes. Then he saw the battered remains of his host, banners cast down, men kneeling or else lying dead. His jaw tightened. Slowly, he opened his hand and let his sword drop to the ground. I yield, the Kingslayer said, spitting out the words like they were poison. At that moment, the horns sounded a final call, signaling that the field was won. The entire Lannister force was broken, leaderless but for Jaime, who now knelt at Robb Stark's mercy. A ragged cheer spread among the northern ranks, some chanting Robb's name, others chanting, the king in the north. Over it all, Robb felt only relief, and a cold, grim satisfaction that now, at last, he had both Tywin and Jaime. Father dead, son captured. The Lannisters' power was shaken to its core. The next move was his to make. That night, inside Riverrun's great hall, Jaime Lannister sat in chains, under heavy guard. The captive glowered at Robb as he was brought forward. Edmure Tully, the Blackfish, and other northern lords stood around, forming a half-circle. Jaime's normally handsome features were marred by grime and dried blood. A bandage wrapped his shoulder. Even chained, he retained that brazen arrogance. You have me. What now? He asked, voice low. Will you kill me, as you killed my father? Robb studied Jaime's face. I didn't kill Tywin in cold blood. We met in battle, fairly fought, and he fell. That was war. The question is, are we still at war or will there be negotiation? Jaime snorted, eyes flicking to the Tully sigils around the room. You think you can ransom me for your father? The mention of Ned twisted Robb's heart with bitterness. If that is what it takes, yes. He looked at his advisors. We will send terms to King's Landing. In exchange for my father and sisters, I will return Jaime Lannister alive and well, or I'll keep him until they see reason. Let's see how Joffrey fancies the idea of his uncle locked in a northern dungeon. Jaime's laugh was hollow. The boy is a monster. Who knows if he even cares? It was not the answer Robb wanted. He took a breath, reminded himself that Jaime might simply be trying to sow doubt. Regardless, you're more valuable as a hostage than a corpse. For now, you'll be treated fairly, but you'll remain a prisoner. No more sword, no more riding free. Jaime's lips curled. I'm sure you'll keep me in style befitting the Kingslayer. Robb motioned to the guards, who pulled Jaime away, clanking chains echoing down the corridor. Silence fell in the hall. The assembled lords studied Robb, waiting for his decree. There was a tension there, an unspoken desire for revenge. Many men had lost friends, family, or lands to the Lannisters. No small number wanted Jaime's head. But Robb raised a hand for calm. Killing Jaime gains us nothing right now. With Tywin gone, we have the best leverage we can hope for. The men nodded, some grudgingly. The Great John muttered that this was wise, then raised a toast, praising Robb's sense of strategy. Others followed suit, proclaiming Robb's rightful position as the leader of this war effort. Edmure Tully, standing near the dais, murmured that House Tully stood with him always. Messages were dispatched from Riverrun to King's Landing, carrying Robb's ultimatum. Ned Stark and his daughters returned, unharmed, in exchange for Jaime's release. A cessation of hostilities, safe passage for the northern host back across the neck if they wished. The days that followed were a swirl of activity as the fortress bustled with wounded men receiving care, funeral rites for the fallen, and councils deciding their next moves. Robb found himself missing the simpler days of Winterfell when the biggest worries were harvest counts and the occasional squabble among bannermen. War was a never-ending storm, even in victory. He spent time with his uncle Edmure, rebuilding the defenses around Riverrun, ensuring that any future siege would not catch them off guard. Together they surveyed the battered gates, the damage done by Jaime's brief siege. They oversaw the training of fresh levies, taught them formation drills, and assured the river lords that the North was committed to their defense. The sense of camaraderie bloomed in the shared triumph. Most men were in awe of Robb's achievements. He has the wolf's blood, they said of him, referencing his Targaryen-descended grandmother or the old line of the Kings of Winter. The mystique only grew with each retelling of the battles. Robb tried to keep a clear head, aware that pride could lead him astray. Each night he prayed to the old gods, kneeling before the weirwood in Riverrun's godwood. The moonlight cast dappled shadows through the carved face in the weirwood's pale bark. He prayed for his father's safety, for his sisters to remain unharmed, for the North to endure. Sometimes he thought he heard an answer in the rustling leaves, but it was only the wind. Grey Wind kept watch, silent and loyal. After a fortnight, a raven arrived from King's Landing. The letter was penned in curt language, suppose. Delay from King Joffrey himself. It demanded Robb's unconditional surrender, insisting that Ned Stark was a confessed traitor. If the rebellious Northmen truly sought mercy, they would lay down arms and release Jaime Lannister at once, or face the crown's wrath. The letter ended with an unmistakable threat. Ned Stark's life would be forfeit if the northern host refused. Upon reading it, Robb's fury ignited. Joffrey had learned nothing, or perhaps Cersei guided his hand, refusing to bargain. The war drums began to pound again in Robb's ears. He shared the missive with his advisors, who declared it an insult. The Great John demanded they march on King's Landing at once, tear down the Red Keep stone by stone, and fling Joffrey from the battlements. Others counseled caution. How many men did the crown have left? What of the Tyrells or other houses who might support King's Landing? News was spotty, but it seemed Renly Baratheon had assembled a large host in the Reach, and Stannis was fortifying Dragonstone. The realm was fracturing into multiple claims. In that fracturing, Robb realized lay their opportunity. If Joffrey refused to parley, perhaps Renly or Stannis might be open to an alliance, at least to see Ned freed. Letters were sent to both Baratheon brothers, tentatively inquiring about terms. Then, unwilling to let Joffrey think the North was cowed, Robb ordered a slow push eastward. They would not commit to a full siege yet, but they would take certain strategic positions, like the crossroads of the Blackwater Rush, to strangle any approach to King's Landing from the west. Meanwhile, Jaime Lannister remained a prisoner at Riverrun, guarded day and night. The men welcomed the fresh orders with zeal. They marched out from Riverrun, weaving through the verdant riverlands, which were finally seeing some respite from the ravages of war. Villagers emerged to greet them, some offering bread, cheese, or small tokens of gratitude. Robb's war council spoke of the need to keep discipline, to avoid turning the small folk against them. He recalled how the Lannisters had sacked the Riverlands, and he vowed the North would not become the same monstrous presence. Honor still guided him as much as war allowed. Roose Bolton rejoined them, having seized Harrenhal with minimal resistance. He brought with him grim tidings of the castle's condition, describing its melted towers and haunted halls. The men who had garrisoned Harrenhal for the Lannisters had fled upon hearing of Tywin's death. It was a symbolic victory, if not a strategic stronghold. Bolton described it as a place of fear. Robb assigned some men to hold it, but he had no wish to dwell in that cursed fortress for long. He wanted to keep pressure on King's Landing and wait to see if the crown would crack under the dual burdens of losing Tywin's leadership and facing multiple claimants. It was near the crossroads in that he encountered the first real sign of organized resistance from what remained of the crown's forces in the region. A small army, led by some lesser Lannister bannermen, tried to bar his passage. The clash was brief but bloody. The northern host, hardened by prior battles, swept them aside in a single afternoon. News of the victory spread, prompting further desertions in the Lannister ranks. Some men openly declared they would no longer fight for House Lannister, especially with Tywin dead and Jaime captured. Others retreated toward the Westerlands, hoping to guard their own lands from any Stark invasion. Robb let them go if they were willing to lay down arms, preferring to conserve his own strength. Amid these maneuvers, ravens arrived from Renly's camp. The younger Baratheon brother claimed he would be the rightful king, backed by the might of House Tyrell. He invited Robb to treat with him to discuss an alliance. Some of Robb's advisors, notably the Blackfish, felt that a meeting could be beneficial. Others, such as Roose Bolton, warned that an alliance with Renly might mean subjugation or complicated terms that would compromise northern independence. It was a thorny matter. Eventually, Robb decided that he should at least hear what Renly had to offer. After all, if King's Landing remained obstinate, the North needed a path to free Ned that did not involve an all-out assault on the Red Keep. Perhaps an alliance with Renly could be leveraged to threaten King's Landing from two directions. If Joffrey or Cersei realized they faced war on multiple fronts, they might finally bend. A part of Robb suspected that King's Landing might not yield at all, that the cruelty of Joffrey, stoked by Cersei's venom, could lead to Ned's death regardless of leverage. But he had to try. So, near the Mander's headwaters, Robb left a significant portion of his force under Edmure's command and rode with a chosen retinue to meet Renly Baratheon. The journey took them through tracts of countryside still blissfully untouched by war. Flowers swayed in meadows, and the sun shone on fields of golden wheat. It felt surreal after the battlefields and burned ruins. Soldiers in Tyrell livery occasionally patrolled the roads, but they did not interfere with Robb's progress once they recognized him as an envoy. They found Renly's camp perched on a broad hill overlooking a lush valley. Banners of the Golden Rose of Highgarden mingled with the Stag of Baratheon. Pavilions in bright green and gold stretched as far as the eye could see. The sound of merriment drifted on the breeze. Music, laughter, the clinking of goblets. It was like some grand tourney, hardly seeming like a war camp. Robb felt a jolt of disapproval. War was not a game. The men who died on fields of battle deserved more respect. He was ushered into Renly's grand pavilion, where the self-proclaimed king awaited with courtiers and knights. Renly greeted him with effusive warmth, praising his victories against Tywin and noting the rumors swirling about the king in the north. Margaery Tyrell stood at his side, a vision of poise and grace, though her expression was guarded. The Tyrell lords, including Mace Tyrell, offered courteous nods, clearly weighing Robb's presence. They had no love for Lannisters. They had once been allied with Robert Baratheon in rebellion, but times had changed. The meeting proceeded with polite formalities. Renly congratulated Robb on removing Tywin from the board. He called it a service to the realm, though Robb suspected flattery. When talk turned to alliances, Renly proposed a grand coalition, the North and the Reach uniting to take King's Landing, dethrone Joffrey, and crown Renly as the rightful king. In exchange, Renly promised autonomy for the North in all but name, with certain trade advantages and the recognition of Ned Stark's innocence. He even hinted that Ned might serve as hand again under King Renly if Ned so desired. It sounded too good to be true. Robb listened carefully, aware that words of kings and lords often hid self-interest. Mace Tyrell spoke of how House Tyrell could feed the North, how they could break the might of the Crown's armies if they worked in concert. There was a superficial appeal. With Tywin gone, the North was in a position of strength. Renly's host was massive, supplemented by Highgarden's wealth and manpower. Together, they might indeed force King's Landing to surrender. That presumably would ensure Ned's release before Joffrey or Cersei could act. But could Robb trust them? Would the Tyrells try to impose taxes or dominion on the North once the Lannisters were beaten? Robb expressed guarded interest but made no commitment. "I care only for my father's freedom and the safety of my people," he said. "The North did not rise to gain crowns. We rose because the crown betrayed us." Renly smiled broadly. "And under my reign that betrayal would be undone. You have my word. Ned Stark will be freed and pardoned, his daughters returned safely. The North will have peace on its own terms." They debated the finer points. Renly wanted Robb to bend the knee to acknowledge him as king of the Seven Kingdoms. Robb demurred. "I won't speak for all of the North," he said. "They have shed blood to be free of Southern rule." He felt the weight of the Greyjoy's words back at Riverrun, the calls to make him king in the North. But he was also compelled by the possibility of saving Ned without further bloodshed. Could he compromise? In the end, they reached a tentative agreement to coordinate military efforts against King's Landing, with the final arrangements regarding the North's status to be determined once Joffrey was deposed and Ned released. Renly argued that once the immediate threat was removed, they could negotiate a lasting settlement. Robb remained cautious, but the promise of immediate action to save Ned weighed heavily. He agreed to dispatch ravens to his bannermen and discuss the terms with them. In turn, Renly pledged to move his host toward King's Landing, placing pressure on Cersei and Joffrey from the south. Robb departed the camp with mixed feelings. Renly was affable and confident, but he was also playing his own game. War was always about alliances that could shift like sand. Still, if it meant a genuine chance to secure Ned's freedom, how could he refuse? The alternative was a direct assault with only the North's strength, an attack that could lead to Ned's death before they even reached the Red Keep. He returned to his men, discussing the proposed partnership with the Blackfish and other trusted lords. Some were vehement that Robb should name himself king in the North outright, refusing any subservience to a southern crown. Others argued that Ned's life was the priority and a short-term alliance served the goal. The debates were fierce. Robb ultimately decided that preserving his father was paramount and that forging an alliance with Renly did not necessarily mean sacrificing the North's future independence. He hoped he could walk the narrow path and hold on to the North's freedom while saving Ned. Word traveled swiftly throughout the camp and the men prepared for a new march. Robb intended to move east, joining Renly's approach on King's Landing. Along the way, he still had to manage the prisoner Jaime Lannister, who was being transferred under heavy guard. Dispatches from Riverrun indicated that all was calm there. Edmure Tully would hold fast in case any rebellious remnants of House Lannister tried to retake the Riverlands. Roose Bolton remained in Harrenhal to secure the fortress and watch for any sign of the Crown's approach from the northeast. The next weeks were a whirlwind of preparation and movement. The northern host, now somewhat reinforced by men from the Riverlands, advanced through territory closer to King's Landing, capturing minor outposts and repelling Crown loyalists. They kept Jaime under constant watch. More than once, they caught him attempting to bribe his guards or sow discord. Yet his efforts were in vain. No one wanted to see the Lannisters resurrected in power. The name Young Wolf was whispered with respect and a touch of dread among the captive foes. Meanwhile, messages flew between Robb and Renly, coordinating their approaches. Renly advanced with a grand show of force through the Reach, parading his power. The small folk flocked to him, enthralled by the pomp. Robb, for his part, maintained a steady course, focusing on discipline and on limiting looting or pillaging. He wanted to set an example for how the North conducted war, harsh when needed but not cruel for cruelty's sake. Eventually, their combined armies neared the outskirts of King's Landing. Scouts reported that the city was in turmoil. The commoners were fearful supplies were running short because so many roads were cut off by rebellious forces, and the rumored cruelty of King Joffrey fanned discontent. The gold cloaks were rumored to be on edge, forcibly maintaining order. Queen Cersei was said to be losing her grip, and the lords of the small council bickered among themselves. Robb's heart pounded as they set up encampments just far enough from the city to remain safe from archers on the walls. Even from a distance, he could see the Red Keep perched upon its bluff, the spires of the Great September, the labyrinth of twisting streets. He gazed at it with a mixture of hatred and hope. Somewhere inside those walls, his father and sisters were held. With Tywin dead, with Jaime in chains, might they finally break the Crown's will and free Ned? Renly arrived with his host a day later, and the two forces formed an impressive ring around the city. Messengers carried demands for surrender, calling on Joffrey to abdicate. The response was typical: defiance, threats, declarations that Ned Stark was a traitor. Worse news came in rumors that the king's small council planned to put Ned on trial or had already done so in secret. Panic flared in Robb's chest. He summoned all his resolve. He would not let them execute his father. If the crown refused to yield, they would storm the city. But the cost in lives would be staggering. Both sides engaged in a series of negotiations at the gates. Robb's envoys demanded Ned's release immediately. The crown's spokesman, commanded by the imperious Queen Cersei, refused any terms that recognized Renly or Robb's authority. The stalemate persisted for 2 tense days, during which the city's gates were shut. The port watched warily for any sign of a naval attack from Stannis. The lords in Robb's camp whispered that the city might starve if cut off for too long. Others argued for an immediate assault, but Robb hesitated, mindful that an attack might prompt Joffrey to take Ned's head in retaliation. Late on the second day, a sudden commotion rippled through the camps. A flight of ravens rose from the Red Keep. Scouts rushed to Robb's tent with breathless urgency. A rumor spread that Joffrey, in a fit of rage, had ordered Ned Stark brought to the steps of the Great September of Baelor. Horror seized Robb at the possibility. Without waiting, he gathered a contingent of horsemen. Renly and several Tyrell knights followed, demanding more information. They surged to the city gates, calling for them to be opened, shouting that if Ned Stark was harmed, there would be no mercy. Atop the walls, gold cloaks watched with blank faces. In the distance, they saw movement near the Great September. The city's bells began to toll. Fear sank like a stone in Robb's gut. He remembered that day in Winterfell when he learned of his father's capture. Now, he feared it might be the day he learned of his father's death. "Open the gates," the men roared. The gates remained locked. Anger boiled over among the northern ranks. Men pounded on the barred wood. Some tried to set it aflame, but the defenders poured water from above. Then a wave of panic spread among the gold cloaks on the walls. They suddenly scattered, leaving the battlements unguarded. One of the heavy gates began to creak open from within. Before Robb's eyes, a lone figure appeared, staggering out onto the drawbridge, flanked by 2 gold cloaks. Robb's breath caught. It was Ned Stark, disheveled, hands bound, limping slightly. His eyes swept across the waiting army, relief and heartbreak mixing on his worn features. Behind him, a handful of Lannister guards stood, crossbows aimed. A hush fell. Robb dismounted, running forward. "Father!" he called, voice strained. Ned stood there, blinking in disbelief. For an instant, it seemed like the moment of salvation was at hand. Then the guards behind Ned tensed, uncertain. A herald in Lannister livery stepped forward, clearing his throat. "By the command of King Joffrey, Lord Eddard Stark is offered in exchange for the Kingslayer. Release Jaime Lannister to the crown at once, or Lord Stark will be taken back inside to face the king's justice." Robb's fists clenched. He could sense the presence of Jaime, back in camp. It was an exact standoff. Ned's eyes locked with Robb's, silently urging him to accept. Robb's heart pounded. He recalled all the men who had died, all the sacrifices made. If he gave Jaime back, he lost the biggest bargaining piece. But if he refused, they might lose Ned's life. The memory of Tywin's dead face flashed in his mind. This was the cost of war. Slowly, Robb raised his hand. He couldn't risk his father's life. "Bring the Kingslayer," he ordered. After some tense minutes, Jaime was brought, still chained under heavy guard. The Great John snarled, "This is madness." But he obeyed Robb's command. Jaime was led to the edge of the encampment. The Lannister herald nodded. "Release him." Robb said nothing, only nodded to his guards. They undid Jaime's chains. He stepped free, rolling his shoulders, glaring at Robb with cool contempt. "Let my father go," Robb demanded. The herald gestured for Ned to walk forward, but the gold cloaks still aimed crossbows. Ned stepped gingerly, crossing the drawbridge toward Robb. Robb moved toward his father, arms outstretched. The moment stretched, a fragile thread binding two sides that bristled with weapons. Then, mercifully, Ned reached Robb's side. In that same instant, Jaime broke into a run, dashing across the bridge. The gold cloaks parted to let him pass. Their crossbows never wavered from Ned or Robb. For a tense moment, it seemed like all might unravel. Then Ned was fully among the northern men, and Jaime was within the city. The gates slammed shut. Crossbowmen still lined the walls, but Ned was free. Relief washed over Robb like a tidal wave. He grabbed his father, feeling the gauntness, the trembling in Ned's frame. "Father," he breathed. Ned managed a faint smile, tears in his eyes. "You've done well, Robb. You've done more than I could have dreamed." His voice was hoarse as though from long disuse. "We have to find your sisters," he added desperately, glancing at the high walls. Robb nodded, heartbeat racing. "We will. This is not over. But you're safe now. The rest we can handle." He could sense his men pressing close, a shield of northern steel around their lord. The Lannisters had bartered Jaime for Ned, but Sansa and Arya were unaccounted for. At the gates, a mocking voice called down, "Run back north, traitors, or the next time you see the capital it will be from the headsman's block." Whether it was a gold cloak or some Lannister officer, Robb did not care. He had his father. That was what mattered. He turned and guided Ned away from the gates, the entire host withdrawing under the watchful eyes of the city's defenders. The bells of the Great September fell silent, leaving only the distant rumble of uneasy crowds within. King's Landing remained unconquered, Joffrey still on the throne, but House Stark had reclaimed its patriarch. That single victory meant the world to Robb, a validation that his choice to trade Jaime was worth it. He knew the war was far from done. The Lannisters would regroup, and he still needed to ensure Arya and Sansa's safety. Renly's alliance might fracture now that Jaime was free. So many burdens remained. But for this moment, father and son were reunited. That night, in the relative safety of their camp beyond arrow range, Ned was treated for his injuries. He pressed Robb for every detail of the war, eyes lighting with a blend of alarm and awe when he learned of Tywin's death. Robb saw flickers of sorrow in his father's gaze. Ned had never relished the killing of enemies. But he also saw pride that Robb had stood firm, protecting the family and the North. They spoke quietly in a tent, the lantern casting dancing shadows on the canvas. Grey Wind lay at Robb's feet, occasionally lifting his head to sniff at Ned, reacquainting himself. Ned stroked the direwolf's fur gingerly, a ghost of a smile on his lips. He turned to Robb with a grave expression. "Joffrey will never forgive T's humiliation. He'll want vengeance. And Cersei, she won't rest until she sees us all destroyed if she can manage it." Robb nodded, feeling the heavy weight of the crown that many would place upon his head. "Then let her try. We'll not bow to them again." Ned's eyes reflected both weariness and steely resolve. "I believe you, son. The North is lucky to have you. And I'm sorry I couldn't shield you from all this bloodshed." Robb leaned forward, placing a reassuring hand on his father's shoulder. "We are Starks, father. We endure." He felt a fierce love for this man who had taught him honor and duty. The bloodshed had changed them all, but the bond remained unbreakable. Outside, the night was quiet, the sky a tapestry of stars. Tomorrow, the war would resume in all its complexity. But for tonight, the young wolf had succeeded in the impossible. Tywin Lannister was dead, Jaime Lannister had been captured and exchanged, and Ned Stark was free. A chapter of vengeance and bold strokes had rewritten the fate of the North. The next chapters would bring new challenges, new perils, but also new hope. And so Robb Stark closed his eyes, listening to his father's breathing, the steady heartbeat of the North, and the distant wind that whispered across the fields like an echo of winter, reminding them all that the greatest battles still lay ahead. Ned Stark's return to the encampment had been met with a roar of jubilation that seemed to shake the very canvas of the tents. Men who had been hardened by weeks of campaigning, who had marched tirelessly under the young wolf's banner, who had fought with steel and blood and desperation, cheered and clapped one another on the back as if they had just witnessed a miracle. And in a sense they had. The Lord of Winterfell was alive, freed from the Red Keep by the exchange of Jaime Lannister, and now stood beside his son, the once awkward boy who had become a leader of armies and a victor of battles. In the flickering torchlight, the two Starks embraced. Then the rest of the night passed in a clamor of relief and exultation as ale was shared and tears were shed. Haggard soldiers recounted their hopes that they might see this day, and now it was real, against all odds. But morning brought no rest. The wind sighed across the trampled grasses, carrying the smell of horses and the stale, bitter tang of old campfires. Robb Stark emerged from his tent, fatigue plain in his eyes. Beside him walked his father, leaning on a wooden cane that a soldier had hastily provided, for Ned's injuries were not insignificant. He moved with painful care, each step a reminder of his captivity. Gray wind padded silently around them, his presence still as uncanny to Ned as the day the pups were found in the snowdrifts near the dead dire wolf in the Wolfswood. Yet father and son both felt a warmth in that moment, the sense that they could speak as family again, however harsh the times. A few lords of the north had gathered, awaiting word from the Starks. The Great John hovered near a cooking fire with some tall, broad-shouldered Umber men. Roose Bolton stood to one side, arms folded, flanked by silent Dreadfort riders. Ser Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, lingered as well, close to the standard of House Tully, his dark eyes flicking between Ned and Robb with a certain wariness. None knew exactly what to expect of Ned Stark, newly returned. They respected him, he was Eddard Stark after all. But the shape of the war had changed drastically since his capture. Robb was no longer just the Lord's eldest son, he was their war leader, the young wolf, the man who had brought them victories no one had dared imagine. Robb gestured for a space to be cleared so that his father could speak. A ring of solemn faces drew around them, men from houses Serwyn, Glover, Tallheart, Manderley, and others who had once known Ned personally. They lowered themselves to one knee, some awkwardly or with tired groans. A hush fell across the encampment, broken only by the braying of a distant mule and the flap of banners in the wind. Ned turned slowly, letting his gaze rest on each face. "My lords," he said, voice quiet but firm. "You've risked much for House Stark. You fought to free me, though the cost was dear. I owe each of you and your men a debt I can never fully repay." They murmured among themselves, saying that their loyalty was not for sale, that it was owed from the day Ned Stark became Warden of the North. But Ned, shifting his grip on the cane, signaled for silence. "We stand at the gates of King's Landing, locked in a war that has splintered the realm. Tywin Lannister is dead. Jaime Lannister was our prisoner until last night. My son has done what few thought possible, he broke the lion's teeth. Yet we still face the crown and we still must bring my daughters to safety. Many dangers remain and I would know your minds. Do we press this war until the Lannisters kneel? Do we align with Renly Baratheon? Or do we draw back and safeguard our own?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Men looked at one another, uncertain. Many had begun to believe that the war would end in a triumphant sacking of King's Landing, that the heads of the Lannisters would decorate the ramparts. Others, more pragmatic, wondered if there was sense in pulling back now that Ned was safe, though it stung them to leave Sansa and Arya behind. A few darted glances at Robb because the young wolf had steered them this far. Robb spoke then, his voice steadier than his years might suggest. "Father, you know the cost if we simply go home. Joffrey and the Queen Regent would see us as rebels who kidnapped Jaime, who killed Tywin. They won't forgive. They might regroup with new allies and march against the north. Sansa and Arya are still captives. They could be harmed or held as hostages for years. Our men have bled too much to accept that. But if King's Landing yields, we can demand safe passage for my sisters. We can end the war on terms favorable to the north." Roose Bolton's soft voice joined. "Pressing a siege could be difficult, my lord. The city is large, well fortified, and it's rumored that the gold cloaks might still number in the thousands. The crown might also have hidden caches of wildfire or new sellswords. Yet as the boy says, to withdraw would invite future ruin. They will rebuild. They will thirst for vengeance." The Great John snorted, his huge arms folded across his chest. "I say we carry on. Let the boy king squeal inside his precious castle. He only releases Lord Stark because we have the bigger fangs. Once we snap at his throat, he'll give the girls back too. Or kill them," Ned murmured, his expression grim. "If it appears all hope is lost, Joffrey might do something rash. He does not listen to reason." The ring of men fell silent, each weighing the gravity of Ned's words. It was one thing to march on King's Landing with steel in hand, but if that threatened the lives of Ned's daughters, it might be a price too high. Robb inhaled slowly. "Father, I've spoken with Renly. He has a vast host at his command with the Reach behind him. If we coordinate with him, the city stands no chance. They can't fight us both. Even if they tried, they'd also have to fear Stannis from the sea. There are too many threats. Joffrey might be forced to yield the girls rather than face total ruin." Ned nodded. "There's wisdom in forcing them to see that they cannot fight a war on 3 fronts. But be wary, Renly wants to be king of the 7 kingdoms. He may not look kindly on the North's independence if that is what our lords demand." A hush thickened. Some of the Northmen had begun to call Robb the king in the north, yet Ned's presence reminded them that once upon a time the Starks had bent the knee to the Targaryens for the sake of peace in the realm. Would it be different now? The Blackfish cleared his throat. "And what if we can't come to terms with Renly? Or what if Renly's cause falters? Stannis might become the larger threat. This war grows more complicated by the day." Robb's eyes glowed with determination. "We must keep our focus. Sansa and Arya must be freed, the Lannisters must be kept from threatening our lands, and we must restore order to the Riverlands so our allies there can recover. After that, if the lords of the North choose to name a king, that is theirs to decide. For now, we need to end the fighting before winter falls in earnest." Ned nodded, relieved to see that in his absence Robb had not become lost in the swirl of ambition. The priority was still the same: protect House Stark, protect the North, and end a conflict that could devour the realm. The Great John lifted his hand in a meaty gesture of agreement. "Aye, Lord Stark. I'll follow your lead. We should keep the city ringed. Let them starve or surrender. No need to lose men scaling walls if we can wait them out." Men murmured. The idea of a siege was tempting, but it might take months, and Cersei could do anything in that time. Yet a full-scale assault risked the girls' lives. Ned's heart pounded. He remembered all too well how quickly Joffrey had swung a sword in his presence, the boy's face twisted with cruel delight. In the meantime, Ned said, "We can try to smuggle a message to Sansa and Arya, let them know we are here. Possibly arrange an escape if there's some friend inside the city. The lines are not perfectly sealed. People come and go despite the risk." He exchanged a glance with Robb. It was a gamble, but a father's love demanded that he attempt everything possible. Robb nodded solemnly. There was no better plan. The assembled lords acknowledged this approach. They would tighten their hold on the roads in and out of King's Landing, cutting off supplies wherever they could without provoking an immediate slaughter of hostages. They would stand ready to force a confrontation if Joffrey's cruelty boiled over. In the next days, they would see if Renly Baratheon was truly marching to the capital as promised. With that, the War Council dissolved and men drifted away to pass on orders to their companies. Ned exhaled, feeling the pain in his legs. Walking exhausted him, but he was determined not to show too much weakness. Beside him, Robb caught his father by the arm to help him back to the tent. Grey Wind padded silently, muzzle low as if sensing Ned's exhaustion. Inside, the pavilion felt cramped with chests, armor stands, a small table strewn with maps and letters. A single brazier smoldered, giving off a faint warmth. With a grateful sigh, Ned lowered himself onto a camp stool, leaning the cane nearby. He let the hush enclose him for a moment, then looked at his son. Robb set aside his sword belt and knelt on the ground, the posture reminiscent of a boy who once came to his father's solar in Winterfell to ask for instruction. "How bad was it?" Robb asked gently. "In that cell?" Ned closed his eyes. The memories were bitter, dark, airless chambers, the stink of old straw, the humiliating sense of powerlessness. But he also recalled the illusions that Cersei had offered, the false promises of mercy if he would only confess. In the end, the moment of true danger had come in front of the Great September when Joffrey nearly called for his head on a whim. Only the knowledge that Jaime was in Stark hands had forced the Queen to intervene. It was not the black cells, but it might as well have been, Ned murmured. "No sunlight, no comfort. They gave me enough water to live, a crust of bread. Sometimes I'd be questioned by the Queen's men. They wanted me to admit I'd plotted against King Joffrey. But more than that, they wanted me to sign away your right to command, to break the northern host. I refused." A pang of guilt crossed Robb's face. "I'm sorry, father. You have nothing to apologize for," Ned said, lifting a hand. "You saved me. If you had bent the knee, it would have destroyed the North's honor. You made the right choice." Robb took a moment to breathe, relief and deeper understanding mingling in his eyes. "I'll do everything I can to free Sansa and Arya, too. We won't abandon them." A faint smile touched Ned's lips. "I know that." He paused, then let out a low sigh. "Everything has changed, though. Our lords speak of crowning you king in the north. That is no small step. What are your thoughts? Robb hesitated, arms resting on his thighs. In truth, I never wanted a crown. I only wanted to protect our family. After we learned of your imprisonment, after we heard rumors you might be executed, I saw no other way but to fight. Victory followed victory, and the men started naming me king. I never asked for it, but it might be that they demand it. They're proud, father. They want to rule themselves. They remember the days when the kings of winter reigned from the north. Ned's gaze flickered over the maps that lay in disarray on the table. The north hasn't crowned its own in 300 years. But if they believe the Iron Throne is no longer worthy, it's their right to choose a different path. He paused. I would caution you to consider the consequences before you let them place a crown on your head. Once a man claims to be a king, there's no easy turning back. Renly will expect you to yield if he becomes king of the 7 kingdoms, or he'll see you as a rival. We might trade one war for another. Robb nodded, brow furrowed. I've thought of that. I'd rather not wear any crown. We can talk of that once Sansa and Arya are safe. Yes, Ned said. One step at a time. They exchanged a look of mutual understanding. Then Ned beckoned Robb to help him up from the stool, and they made their way back outside, where the hush of early morning had been replaced by the commotion of 1,000 tasks. Horses snorted, blacksmiths hammered, men drilled with pikes. The life of an army on the brink of siege pressed on. Within 2 days, they began receiving word that Renly's forces were indeed drawing closer. Ravens arrived at intervals, bearing courteous but insistent messages from the self-proclaimed king, urging the north to hold their lines and wait for his arrival. Robb remained cautious. The alliance had never been formally sealed, only discussed. And from the capital, no further messages came, though rumors abounded that Cersei had forcibly taken control of the gold cloaks, that Joffrey's rages were growing more frequent, and that the population was on the verge of rioting due to food shortages. If the city turned against the Boy King, it might make the northern cause easier. Yet with Sansa and Arya locked away who knew where, Robb had to maintain discipline. At twilight on the second day, Ned and Robb sat together again in Robb's tent, accompanied by the Blackfish, Roose Bolton, and a few selected lords, to discuss a clandestine plan to reach the girls. They had gleaned that Varys the Spider still operated within the Red Keep, perhaps providing a line of communication. Some thought to bribe him or coerce him to smuggle out a note. Others suggested sending in a small party of elite scouts who could scale the walls, risking everything in a daring rescue. Ned remained torn. A direct infiltration could get them killed if discovered. The Queen might retaliate brutally. Perhaps we need a less obvious approach, the Blackfish said gruffly. Like letting word slip that a handmaiden or stable boy loyal to the north is near the gate, or that some gold cloak is willing to look the other way. Plant rumors. Make them come to us. But the risk of rumor was that it could slip into the wrong ears. Each idea carried enormous peril, and Ned's jaw clenched with frustration. He had regained his freedom only to stand helpless outside the city that imprisoned his daughters. While they debated, a stir arose at the perimeter of the camp. A rider wearing the colors of Highgarden trotted in under a flag of truce. He carried a sealed letter for Lord Stark and King Robb Stark as the letter addressed them. The man bowed, handing it over. Robb noted the neat script that bore the name of Margaery Tyrell. Surprised, he broke the seal under the Lord's watchful eyes. The letter was an invitation for Ned Stark, Robb Stark, and any small retinue they chose to attend a meeting with Renly and his queen, Margaery, some 3 leagues south of the city. Renly wished to parley in person before they closed the ring around King's Landing. Robb read it out loud, glancing at Ned to gauge his reaction. The Great John huffed at the notion of parley, eager to keep the city starved into submission, but Ned raised a hand. We need to know Renly's intentions, especially if he expects us to declare for him as king. If an alliance ensures we can rescue my daughters, it might be worth the risk. But let us take caution, this might be a trap or at least a test of our willingness to bend. Bolton inclined his head. I can arrange a careful escort. We'll have eyes on every approach. A day later, Ned and Robb found themselves riding south, accompanied by 50 mounted men for protection. Ned insisted on coming despite his injuries. He would not allow his son to manage alone. Grey Wind loped alongside them, a silent sentinel that kept the men parted on the road to make space for the direwolf's bulk. The day was overcast, the sky layered with gray clouds. The air tasted of moisture as if rain might fall at any moment. They reached a green meadow by a winding stream, an area that seemed carefully chosen by Renly for its gentleness. Bright silken pavilions had been raised, bearing the colors of the Tyrell Rose and the Stag of Baratheon. A few lines of men in half-plate stood guard, their armor polished to a mirror sheen, swords at their hips. The northern riders dismounted, scanning for threats. Bolton's men subtly positioned themselves at vantage points near the tree line. A short distance away, Renly Baratheon himself emerged from a pavilion wearing a green doublet embroidered with golden stags, a cloak of midnight blue pinned with a golden rose. At his side stood Margaery Tyrell, slender and poised, her dark hair woven with small golden roses. The Tyrell patriarch, Mace Tyrell, and a line of Reach lords followed. Robb's first impression was that this gathering looked more like the opening of a grand tourney than a war council. Renly greeted them with a winning smile, arms spread wide as if to embrace them. "My Lord Stark," Renly said, nodding first to Ned, "and my Lord Robb Stark, or shall I say, the young wolf." He glanced at Robb's lean, straight-backed figure with the wry curiosity of a man eager to see the rumored warrior up close. Ned inclined his head. "Lord Renly, thank you for the invitation." Renly's gaze flicked to Ned's cane. "I'm relieved you're free of the Red Keep, my lord. If the city had chosen a more savage path, we wouldn't have this moment of meeting. You have my sympathies for what you must have endured." "It was war," Ned said, voice steady. "We do what we must for our families." Margaery Tyrell offered a graceful curtsy. "And we do what we must for the realm. My husband hopes your forces can unite with ours. The Lannisters' hold on the Iron Throne must end for the good of the Seven Kingdoms." Robb exchanged a glance with his father. "That depends on the terms, your grace," he said, giving Renly a courteous but careful acknowledgement of his supposed royal title. "We have not declared for the Iron Throne. Our quarrel is with the crown only because of the injustice done to my father, the captivity of my sisters, and the cruelty inflicted upon the Riverlands and the North." Renly nodded, a serious expression replacing his earlier smile. "Walk with me." He gestured to the meadow, and Robb, Ned, and a few northern lords followed while the rest remained behind, tense. Greywine trotted beside Robb, causing more than one Tyrell retainer to take a step back. The massive direwolf's amber eyes scanned the surroundings as if assessing threats. They paused near the stream where the late summer grasses swayed. Renly exhaled, glancing at Ned. "Lord Stark, I know you served my brother Robert loyally as his hand. I also know you opposed many of the Lannisters' actions and tried to reveal the truth of my brother's heirs. I've heard the rumors that Joffrey is not Robert's son. I believe those rumors myself." Ned kept his expression neutral, though the memory of King Robert's last days still stung. "Then you understand why I could not stand idle while Cersei manipulated the throne." Renly's jaw tightened. "Robert was my older brother, but we rarely agreed on anything. Still, I loved him. If he knew the Lannisters meant to steal the throne from his true bloodline, he would have raged until the castle walls shook. But it's too late for that. Now, there's a bigger question: who will sit the Iron Throne if not Joffrey?" Ned didn't answer immediately. Robb, standing close, folded his arms. "You claim it's you, though you have an older brother, Stannis, who also claims it," Robb said, bluntly enough that a few of Renly's retainers bristled. Renly gave a tight smile. "Stannis has no support but his island fortress and a few lords who favor his stern nature. The realm does not love him, and he does not know how to inspire loyalty. I, on the other hand, bring the Reach and the Stormlands under one banner. When I take the throne, I will restore stability to the realm." Ned's gaze traveled to Margaery, who stood a step behind Renly, silent now, her eyes shining with quick intelligence. "And what do you propose for the North?" he asked softly. "We did not march south to set a new king on the throne, only to protect our own." Margaery spoke then, her voice gentle. "My lord, the North has suffered grievously at the hands of the crown. My husband wishes to ensure that does not happen again. We ask only that you recognize him as the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms, as the best hope for peace. In return, your lands will be assured of their sovereignty in all but name. We can work out the details, but your father will remain warden of the North, your people free to govern themselves without southern interference. Taxes will be fair, trade unhampered. The Riverlands, too, shall be under your joint protection. Your family's sacrifices will be recognized, and the Starks will become the greatest allies of House Baratheon." Robb listened carefully. The words sounded alluring: peace, autonomy, a formal arrangement that might keep the Lannisters at bay. Yet something itched at him. "And what of my sisters? You speak of peace, but the Lannisters hold Sansa and Arya, no matter that we have my father back." Renly angled his head in sympathy. "I propose we break the city's defenses in a show of united strength. Storm's End banners, Highgarden banners, the might of the North, all arrayed around the walls. The moment Joffrey sees that he cannot win, he will yield or be replaced from within by those who see reason. Then your sisters will be freed, safely returned to you. Not even the Lannisters would be rash enough to slaughter them when the entire realm stands in judgment." Ned's jaw tightened. "I appreciate your confidence, your grace. but Joffrey's rashness has nearly ended in my death once before. He might try to do the unthinkable if cornered. A hush fell. The only sounds were the babble of the stream, the rustle of grass in the wind. At length Marjorie spoke again. We understand your fear. Perhaps a direct assault is safer. We would be prepared to lead the vanguard, to storm the gates and secure the Red Keep, ensuring that the Lannisters have no chance to carry out such a desperate act. Robb's mind turned to bloodshed. A direct assault on King's Landing might cost thousands of lives, including possibly his sisters if the battle went poorly. Or, Robb said, we keep them bottled up, letting the city starve. But do we want to cause suffering to innocent small folk? Renly frowned. Sieges lead to disease, famine, riots. The city will be in chaos. That might also endanger your sisters. Ned's eyes were distant. In every scenario, my daughters risk harm. Renly raised a hand. Allow me to propose one further idea. We contrive a partial blockade, cutting off roads for large shipments of grain or arms, but not punishing the populace so severely that they riot in the streets. That way, the pressure mounts on Joffrey and Cersei, but not to the point of total desperation. Meanwhile, you or I or both of us send envoys to the city's leading merchants, the guilds, the faith. Show them there's a better alternative to blind obedience to the Lannisters. Perhaps they will push from inside. A bloodless coup, if we are fortunate. Ned studied the younger man, considering the sincerity of his words. You speak of a plan that might take time. The North is not without its own concerns. Winter will come, and our supplies must be stocked. But if it ensures my daughter's safety, perhaps patience is the lesser evil. Marjorie inclined her head. Precisely. We must also consider the presence of Stannis. If he decides to sail up the Blackwater with a fleet, the city will panic. He is your rightful ally by blood, you might say, but in practical terms, he's not likely to be lenient with the North or the Riverlands after the war. He might rule with an iron fist. Do you truly wish to exchange Cersei's cruelty for Stannis' severity? Ned's mouth formed a thin line. He and Stannis had not always agreed, but Ned respected Stannis' sense of justice. Yet there was no denying that the man was rigid, unbending. He might not give the North the freedom they desired. Robb's voice cut in softly. You've given us much to think about, Your Grace, my lady. For now, we can at least agree that neither of us wants the Lannisters to remain in power. Renly's face brightened. Indeed. Might I suggest we formalize an understanding? Even if it's only a short-term pact of mutual alliance against the Lannisters, we can sign it here and now, guaranteeing that your host won't oppose mine and mine won't oppose yours. Ned and Robb exchanged looks. The Blackfish, standing a little way off, gave a near-imperceptible nod as if to say a short-term pact carried little risk. Bolton's face revealed nothing, but he did not object. All right, Ned said, quiet but resolute. We can sign an agreement of mutual non-aggression and cooperation against the Lannisters. But I will not pledge the North's fealty outright until the safety of my daughters is secured and until the Lords of the North have spoken their will. Renly's smile widened. That is acceptable. A wise compromise. One victory at a time, Lord Stark. They returned to the Silken Pavilion, where scribes drafted a succinct document stating that the forces led by Renly and those led by the Starks would not engage each other in hostilities and would work toward the removal of Joffrey Baratheon, publicly known as the Child of Incest, from the Iron Throne. It named no official king for the realm as yet, though it recognized Renly's claim to press war on the Lannisters. In turn, the North's position was recognized as distinct under House Stark's leadership with no binding oath beyond cooperation in the immediate conflict. Marjorie Tyrell added her signature, as did her father, Mace, in a show of full Tyrell backing. Robb signed for the North, though he insisted Ned's name stand as well. With that, courtesies were exchanged, cups of watered wine were poured, and a veneer of optimism settled over the gathering. Renly beamed, telling Robb he hoped they would soon feast in the Red Keep's grand hall once Joffrey was deposed. But Ned, noticing how lightly Renly took it all, felt a coil of tension inside him. War was never tidy. Joffrey was dangerous. Cersei was cunning. And this alliance was as fragile as a summer blossom before the freeze of winter. Still, for now, they had staved off conflict between their forces. Maybe that was enough. They parted ways with careful pleasantries. Robb led the northern riders back to camp, Grey Wind loping ahead. The day had grown darker, the clouds heavy and gray, and soon the heavens opened, pouring a cold rain across the fields. Men huddled in cloaks and pulled hoods low over their faces, cursing the weather. Ned, though, rode with his back straight and his head uncovered, letting the rain wash away some of the stale, pained memories of the Red Keep's dungeons. After so long imprisoned, even the misery of a rainstorm felt alive. Upon returning, they found the camp much as they left it, uneasy, watchful. The city walls were still closed. No sign of movement except for the occasional supply cart that had paid the gold cloaks a fortune in bribes to come or go. Ned sent for the Blackfish, Roose Bolton, and the Great John to share the details of the new alliance. Most took it as good news, or at least better than an open front against Renly. The Great John roared with approval at the idea of crushing the Lannisters with a combined army. Roose Bolton's only comment was that a drawn-out standoff would test the men's morale, especially so close to the city's amusements. He warned that discipline must be enforced. Over the following days, the realities of the partial siege set in. Northern scouts and outriders cut off any major roads leading to the city, yet they refrained from slaughtering or robbing the small folk. They took small tithes of grain and salted meat to feed the army, but let peasants who bore no Lannister sigil pass unhurt. Word spread inside King's Landing that the Northmen were not pillaging wantonly, which surprised many. Renly's forces, for their part, were arrayed along the southern roads, preventing supplies from the Reach from entering the capital. A few attempts at smuggling wheat or apples into the city ended with arrests by the Tyrell outriders. Cersei and Joffrey responded with defiance, refusing any negotiations. Now that Jaime was returned, the boy king felt emboldened. But Jaime, recently set free, did not hold the city's command. That remained in the Queen Regent's hands, with the gold cloaks under the watchful eye of men loyal to the royal family. Rumors reached the northern camp that Jaime was furious at the humiliations the Lannisters had suffered, but also that his new position in the city was tenuous, overshadowed by Cersei's desire to maintain control. Some whispered that the Kingslayer would lead a daring raid, or that he might try to strike at the northern leadership in some cunning way. Amid the suspense, Ned directed several attempts to slip messages into the city. A few men disguised as merchants or common laborers crept to the gates, claiming to be bearers of goods from the Crownlands. Some were turned away, others forced to bribe their way in. One or two disappeared entirely, presumably arrested or killed. But one man, a gaunt fellow with a scar over his right cheek, managed to slip back out in the dead of night, bringing a coded note scrawled in a small, cramped hand. It bore no signature, but the message contained a single line: Arya hidden by friend, Sansa at court, both still alive. Ned's hand shook as he read it. Relief warred with fear. At least they were alive, but how to free them? He and Robb burned the note at once and rewarded the messenger handsomely, then pressed him for more detail. The man had none. He was only told to deliver that note. Ned guessed it came from Varys, or from someone else cunning enough to keep secrets in a city of knives. Perhaps the Hound or another guard who had grown sympathetic, though that seemed less likely. Days turned into a 7-day, then 2. The uneasy standoff continued. On a few occasions, small skirmishes broke out along the western or southern roads. A group of gold cloaks would ride forth to gather supplies or punish a village rumored to be harboring rebels, and Robb's outriders would intercept them. Casualties mounted on both sides in these minor clashes, but the city gates never opened for a pitched battle. Cersei was content to let the capital's walls do the work, hoping the besiegers would tire or starve themselves. Meanwhile, the hunger inside the city grew. Prices skyrocketed. Bread riots flared, only to be crushed harshly by the gold cloaks. Renly sent a stream of letters urging that the allies stage a grand demonstration of force, massing their armies at each gate, flaunting their numbers to terrify the small council into surrender. Ned resisted, fearing it might push Joffrey into harming Sansa or Arya. He suggested instead a carefully timed blockade, letting a handful of peasants and unimportant merchants exit while preventing entry of major shipments. When Renly pressed harder, Ned realized that the younger Baratheon was growing impatient. Word had come that Stannis was amassing ships near Dragonstone, preparing for his own bid to take the city. If Renly delayed too long, Stannis might arrive and steal his thunder. On an early morning near the close of the second moon of siege, as Ned was finishing a mug of watered wine in Robb's pavilion, a Tyrell outrider galloped in with an urgent request. Renly wanted an immediate war council in his camp with the northern leaders to finalize a plan of attack on King's Landing. Robb looked at Ned, a question in his eyes. Ned frowned, sensing the pressure. They had not agreed to an all-out assault, but Renly's tone implied he was done waiting. They gathered the northern lords, the Great John, Roose Bolton, the Blackfish, plus Ned and Robb themselves. After a swift ride across the picket lines, they arrived at Renly's camp. The bright pavilions and fluttering banners still gave it a festive veneer, though war's reality lingered in the drawn faces of soldiers who had seen enough blood. They were ushered to the largest tent, where Renly and his foremost generals, among them Ser Loras Tyrell, awaited around a map-strewn table. Marjorie stood nearby, quietly conferring with her father. Renly greeted them politely, but his eyes shone with barely contained impatience. "My lords, you know the city's condition is dire. My scouts report more riots in Flea Bottom, talk of people blaming the crown for the shortage of food. The time is ripe to strike. Another Senite and Stannis might sail into the Blackwater Bay. We cannot afford to let him claim the glory." Robb folded his arms. "Have we any new intelligence about my sisters?" Renly's face hardened slightly. "No direct word. If Joffrey were wise, he would try to use them as bargaining chips. Perhaps he's holding them in Maegor's holdfast. But the city is near breaking. If we present a united front, the Gold Cloaks or the common people might turn against the Lannisters. We march at dawn, surround the walls in one great ring, Tyrell on the south, Stormlands to the east, the north to the west, and any Riverlanders near the northwest gate. We give them one chance to surrender. If they refuse, we storm the city." Ned tensed. Storming the city is not like storming a minor castle. Tens of thousands live there. Many will die. And my daughters. Renly cut him off, though not rudely. "It's an ugly prospect, I know. But letting them starve for another moon's turn will only breed more chaos. Joffrey won't relent unless he's forced. He's proven that. The Gold Cloaks remain under the Queen's thumb. The lords inside have not risen against her. Our only choice is to break them." Some of the Tyrell bannermen muttered in agreement. Others nodded vigorously, eyes alight at the promise of final victory. Ser Loras Tyrell put in, "The city gates aren't as strong as they once were. We can breach them with rams and towers. Once inside, the Lannisters fall swiftly. And your sisters, Lord Stark, might yet be rescued if we strike quickly for the Red Keep." Robb shot a glance at Ned, uneasy. "What of infiltration? Could we slip men in first, maybe secure Sansa and Arya before the assault?" Renly shook his head firmly. "We have no reliable path inside. And if one infiltration is uncovered, Joffrey's retribution will be swift." Bolton's calm voice interjected. "Time is not on our side, nor is it on the side of the city. The risk is great either way. But we owe it to ourselves to choose the path with the greatest chance of success." Ned breathed through his nose, fighting the surge of protective anger that rose at the thought of soldiers rampaging through the streets, inadvertently endangering his daughters. But he saw no easy alternative. The city was locked, the gates closed, and Cersei refused all parley. Perhaps a large-scale siege would indeed lead to a revolt from within, but that revolt might happen too late to save the girls if Joffrey turned on them. After a pause, he forced himself to speak. "If we commit to this plan, can we at least direct the main thrust of the assault at the Red Keep? If we can seize the king's presence quickly, he cannot act against his hostages." Renly nodded. "Yes. I propose we attack 4 gates, the Lion Gate and the Gate of the Gods at the north side, the King's Gate to the east, and the Dragon Gate to the southeast. My men at the Dragon Gate, the Tyrells at the King's Gate, the Riverlanders at the Gate of the Gods, and the Northmen at the Lion Gate. Once inside, we converge on the Red Keep from multiple streets. The first to breach the keep must seize Joffrey, Cersei, or any of the Lannisters. Then the rest will help quell the remaining Gold Cloaks in the city." Ned clenched his fists at his sides. "And the small folk? They'll be in the middle." Renly's gaze wavered for a moment. "We'll do what we can to keep order, but war is war. If the city yields quickly, the damage can be minimized. It's better than letting them starve for moons on end, living in terror of riots." Robb lowered his head, his mind churning with the possibilities. Already, he could envision a swirl of chaos inside the city's cramped streets. Men losing their way, Gold Cloaks ambushing them from rooftops. And yes, Sansa and Arya, lost somewhere in that sprawl. "Very well," Robb said after a long silence. "We'll do our part. But if, at the last moment, the city sues for peace, we must accept unconditional surrender rather than sack it. Our only interest is removing Joffrey and retrieving my sisters. Renly agreed easily. I'm not here to burn King's Landing or turn it into a slaughterhouse. I want a realm that will still obey me. Sacking a city is a poor way to court loyalty. With that tenuous understanding, they laid out final details. The assault would commence at daybreak 2 days hence. The next day, the combined armies would make visible preparations, raising siege towers, forging battering rams, massing in full view of the walls. An ultimatum would be issued. If the city refused, they would begin their assault with the dawn. The meeting ended with somber handshakes and quiet nods. A hush hung in the air as Ned, Robb, and their retinue departed, hearts weighed down by what was to come. When they returned to their own lines, they called a council of northern lords, explaining the plan. The Great John roared with fierce approval, happy to finally put an end to waiting. Others looked more subdued, aware that a direct assault on such a massive population center was a grim affair. Ned paced, leaning on his cane, rethinking every detail that might secure Sansa and Arya's safety. That evening, father and son shared a private conversation in Ned's tent. A single lamp glowed, casting dancing shadows on the canvas. Ned rubbed his temple, exhausted, while Robb sat across from him, the map of King's Landing spread out between them. It will be a bloodbath if they force us to go through with it, Robb said quietly. We'll do everything we can, but the gold cloaks might barricade themselves in the alleys. The Lannisters could use the populace as shields. Father, I'm afraid for them. He didn't need to clarify who he meant. They both knew. Ned nodded, his lips drawn thin. I share your fear. But Cersei might finally see sense if she believes the city can't hold. She could trade the girls for a promise of exile. I'd be willing to spare her if it meant saving Sansa and Arya. He paused, recalling how once upon a time in Winterfell's orchard Sansa had danced about so happily, dreaming of being a queen, how Arya had pestered him about seeing the world beyond the north. Now both were caged by the war. Let's make one final effort to send a message, Robb said. We'll hide it inside a bale of goods or something similar in hopes it reaches someone who can help them. Warn them that we're coming, that they must be ready to flee if they get the chance. Ned agreed. Yes. Let's do that. It might be the only kindness we can offer them before the swords are drawn. They spent the remainder of the night drafting a short note coded to protect them if it fell into the wrong hands, but clear enough if either girl or a friendly face read it. They entrusted it to a quiet man from the Riverlands who had once served as a stable hand for House Tully. He had a cousin in King's Landing who worked in the stables near the Mudgate. The man vowed to slip in and deliver the bale of hay with the secret message inside. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all they had. Dawn of the next day arrived with the sky streaked in pale gold and soft lavender. The siege preparations began in earnest. Carpenters hammered at raw timbers to form makeshift siege towers and rams. Soldiers sharpened swords, repaired armor, tested crossbows. Officers shouted orders, drilling men in formations meant to breach gates or scale walls with ladders. A grim excitement seized the camp, especially among younger knights who saw this as a chance for glory. Those with more experience wore haunted expressions, remembering how chaotic a city assault could become. From the city walls, the watchers in gold cloaks observed the bustle. They no doubt carried word back to Joffrey and Cersei that the noose was tightening. A flutter of movement on the ramparts hinted at archers testing their ranges. Occasionally, a messenger would ride along the perimeter, peering at the allied forces from a distance before turning back. No overture came. King's Landing seemed ready to endure the storm behind its high walls. Ned spent the day making sure the men from the north were well organized into contingents, each commanded by a seasoned lord or knight who had marched south with Robb. The Great John led one large division of Umber men, famed for their berserker ferocity. Roose Bolton commanded a second division, men from the Dreadfort and surrounding houses who specialized in silent, ruthless tactics. Lord Rickard Karstark, who had rejoined them weeks ago, commanded a third group. There were also small pockets of archers, including men from House Mormont and House Glover. Robb himself would lead the final, central portion, riding with Grey Wind and a cadre of mounted knights to smash through once the gate was breached. Ned would remain behind the lines initially, coordinating from a safer position because of his injuries, but he planned to move in as soon as possible if a path to the Red Keep opened. That evening, the Allied forces lit hundreds of torches and marched them in view of the walls, a silent pageant of blazing lights that told King's Landing, prepare. Drums pounded in the Tyrell camp, sending their own message, the time has come. As night fell, the city glowed with watchfires along the battlements. No one in the northern camp slept easily, haunted by the knowledge that, come dawn, the siege might become an all-out assault with an uncertain fate for Sansa and Arya Stark. Ned's dreams that night were filled with jumbled images of Winterfell's courtyard, of swords clashing, of his daughters crying out for him in the distance. He woke at intervals, heart-thudding. Each time he forced himself to breathe, to remind himself that he was free of the dungeons. But the fear for his children was like a knife in his gut. He rose before the first streak of pale light, dressing in partial armor, ignoring the pain in his limbs. Outside, the camp was already astir with men rousing themselves, gathering weapons, harnessing horses. Robb looked impossibly young in the cold morning gloom, standing by his warhorse with gray wind at his side. His cloak was pinned over his shoulders, the direwolf sigil bright against the gray cloth. Yet the set of his jaw and the calm in his eyes told Ned that the boy he had raised was gone, replaced by a commander. In the torchlight, father and son exchanged a brief embrace, mindful that this day could cost them both dearly. Remember, Ned said, gripping Robb's shoulder. Take no foolish risks. Your men need you. The North needs you. Robb clasped his father's forearm. I'll keep my head, father. And I'll watch for any sign of the girls. We must hope for the best. Outside the lines, horns sounded from the Tyrell camp. Soon, war horns answered from the Stormlanders, then from the Riverlanders. The alliance was stirring. The Grey John approached, accompanied by the Blackfish, each man prepared for battle. Roose Bolton came last, pale eyes flicking from Ned to Robb, offering a small bow before he led his own contingent away. From the city, the first rays of sunrise revealed archers on the walls, silhouettes waiting to loose death from above. Men formed ranks, carrying ladders, ropes, rams. Some stationed themselves at catapults, though there were few of those. This siege had been assembled quickly, and the city's size made catapults less effective unless they were willing to lob burning pitch and risk the population. No one wanted to reduce King's Landing to ruins, so the catapults remained mostly as a threat. A hush settled. Then the horns blew again, sharper, signaling the beginning of the ultimatum. From Renly's ranks, a herald rode forward under a white banner, calling out to the walls that this was the last chance to surrender the boy King Joffrey and open the gates or face the righteous fury of the realm. His voice carried across the plain, though it wavered slightly at the end, as if he expected a volley of arrows any moment. After a tense wait, a single figure on the ramparts, a knight in gold cloak regalia, shouted back, "We serve the true king, Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name. Begone, traitors, or we will fill the moats with your corpses." No sign of a parley. No word of releasing the Stark girls. Robb's grip tightened on his reins, knuckles white. Ned set his jaw, pain and anger warring within him. The herald rode back swiftly, shaking his head. A silent ripple moved through the Allied lines. Drums began to pound, standard-bearers raised their flags, officers barked orders. Under the morning sun, the Allied host surged toward the city from four directions, each side determined to break the gates. On the western approach, Robb led the northern men. The ground sloped gently toward the walls, the lion gate rising before them. It was said the gate had an enormous stone lion carved over the arch, a relic from some Targaryen-era lord who admired the beasts. Now it stood as a mocking symbol for the Lannisters. Robb's cavalry and foot soldiers advanced behind a massive wooden ram that men from House Umber pushed on iron-shod wheels. Archers advanced cautiously, trying to draw the defenders' fire so the ram could reach the gate. Gold cloaks peered over the crenellations, crossbows at the ready. Within moments, the first volley of bolts whistled down, peppering the ground, hammering shields. A few men cried out, stumbling as they were struck. The rest pressed on, a grim chorus of "For the North" on their lips. Further along the walls, the Riverlanders led by Edmure Tully and the Blackfish made for the Gate of the Gods. From what glimpses Ned caught, their progress was slow but steady, the defenders not as numerous on that side. On the southern side, the Tyrells and Stormlanders advanced with more flair, rams and siege towers creeping forward under a bombardment of arrows. Fires blossomed as the defenders lit pitch-soaked cloth and hurled it down. Screams filled the air. Ned stayed with a reserve of Northmen a few hundred yards back, observing the assault from a vantage point with a partial view of the western gate. He could see Robb's banner, the gray dire wolf on white, swirling at the forefront. The brunt of the city's arrow fire rained on the men pushing the ram. The Great John roared above the fray, wielding an enormous shield to protect them. Gray wind was a streak of motion, weaving past fallen men, the direwolf's savage snarls echoing up the stone. Arrows hissed from northern bowmen in return, picking off defenders who exposed themselves on the ramparts. Ned silently prayed that the watchers would not spot Sansa or Arya up there. Please, gods, keep them away from those walls. Minutes stretched into an eternity of thunderous crashing, war cries, and the groans of the wounded. The ram slammed into the gate again and again. Ned could see splinters flying. Flames spouted from above as gold cloaks tried to set the ram on fire, but the Northmen doused it with water and kept hammering. Finally, the battered wood of the gate began to give. With one last heave, accompanied by a roar from the Great John and Karstark men, the gate burst inward, revealing a gloom of twisted iron portcullis behind it. A wave of Northmen surged forward. More arrows rained down, plus spears thrust through murder holes, but the momentum carried them inside. Robb led a mounted wedge, forcing horses through the rubble, shouting for men to stay in formation. The Great John battered aside a half-lowered portcullis with his warhammer. As soon as there was enough space, the cavalry poured in, clashing with gold cloaks in the gateway's shadow. Steel rang on steel, screams mingled with the shrieks of terrified horses. Ned turned to Lord Serwyn at his side. Hold the reserves here until they clear the gate. Then follow in carefully. No one gets isolated. Serwyn nodded and began shouting instructions. Ned inhaled, preparing to ride closer. He would not remain behind while his son fought inside those walls. Even wounded, he could provide counsel, coordinate reinforcements. With a small escort, Ned rode toward the Lion Gate. The scene was mayhem. Fallen men, shattered shields, broken spears scattered across the threshold. Bodies in gold cloaks and northern garb alike lay in pools of blood. But the north had broken through. A group of Bolton men rushed forward on foot, hooking the remains of the portcullis with iron-tipped poles and hauling it upward so that the rest of the army could pass. Inside, glimpses of cobblestone streets and tall stone buildings beckoned. The city's heart lay beyond, twisting alleys that led eventually to the Red Keep's looming presence on the horizon. As Ned entered the gate, the stench of smoke and blood caught in his nostrils. Shouts echoed from every direction. Gray Wind's snarl sounded ahead, and Ned saw the direwolf attacking a knot of gold cloaks near a half-ruined barricade. Robb, sword red with blood, urged his horse forward. Spotting Ned, he waved frantically. "Father, stay with the main host," he shouted over the din. "We're pushing them back, but they're fighting fiercely here." Ned nodded, easing his horse to one side, letting a column of Karstark men pass. The gold cloaks, though outnumbered, resisted with grim determination. They likely knew that if they lost, Joffrey might punish their families or that they themselves would face no mercy if the city fell. So they formed pockets of defense at street corners, blocking progress. Bolton's men were skilled at rooting them out, moving with unnerving silence from side alleys, cutting them down or forcing them to yield. Occasionally, a group of civilians darted out, screaming for mercy, hands raised. The northern soldiers shoved them aside or guided them to safer corners with minimal brutality. Ned had insisted on limiting bloodshed among small folk. Still, chaos was impossible to contain entirely. Flames spread from a catapult-fired torch. Some roofs were ablaze. Women wailed from windows. A terrified donkey raced past, dragging an overturned cart. Ned swallowed the lump in his throat. This was war, unstoppable once unleashed. He forced his thoughts to his daughters. Where were they? Safe, hidden, or at imminent risk? Step by step, the Allied columns pressed deeper. Overhead, Ned could hear faint horns from the other gates, suggesting that the Tyrells and Riverlanders were also making progress. The gold cloaks defending the western gate began to collapse, scattering in small groups, retreating toward the central districts. Robb led a pursuit, careful not to overextend. The Grey John hollered for them to keep formation, and some sense of order prevailed, albeit tenuous. Moving along a broad avenue, Ned saw a statue of a Targaryen king defaced with Lannister graffiti. Beyond, the road split. One branch led uphill toward the Red Keep, the other meandered into the tangled streets of Flea Bottom. Robb conferred with the Grey John, deciding to push uphill. Bolton's men, along with smaller detachments, would sweep the side streets to secure the flanks. Soon, the clang of swords rang out from behind barricades thrown up by desperate gold cloaks. The northern soldiers advanced methodically, shields up, archers behind them sending arrows whistling. More fires erupted. People screamed from behind shuttered windows. Some gold cloaks tried to rally in a square dominated by a large September. That stand lasted mere minutes before Bolton's men flanked them. By the time Ned caught up, the steps of the sept were slick with blood. A few wounded gold cloaks staggered, dropping their weapons in surrender. Ned's stomach twisted as he recognized a boy who might have been no older than Arya. The youth wore a half-fitting gold cloak. He collapsed, a mortal wound in his side. This is a horror, Ned thought, but we had no choice. My daughters. He pressed on. They were halfway to the Red Keep's outer walls when a fresh wave of defenders appeared. Leading them was a tall knight in ornate armor bearing a golden lion on his breastplate. At his side, men in Lannister livery advanced, presumably the personal guard of Cersei or the royal family. The knight roared a challenge, his voice echoing in the street. Robb spurred his horse forward, crossing swords with him. The shock of steel meeting steel sounded above the general tumult. "Kingslayer!" someone shouted, and Ned realized with a jolt that it was Jaime Lannister himself, his distinctive face visible through the visor. Freed in the city, he must have rallied what loyal fighters he could to stop the Northerners from reaching the Red Keep. Jaime's swordwork was as swift and lethal as ever. He parried Robb's blow, then lunged, forcing Robb to twist away in the saddle. Another northern knight tried to aid Robb, only for Jaime to strike him down in a single fluid stroke. Ned kicked his horse into a canter, ignoring the pain lancing his leg. He had once crossed swords briefly with Jaime in the streets of King's Landing, before this war truly began. Then, he had been at a disadvantage. Now, he would stand with his son to end this. The Great John and a half-dozen more men joined, forming a semicircle to keep Jaime's guards from overwhelming Robb. Grey wind sprang at the flanks, scattering lesser foes with savage bites. Jaime's eyes flared with fury. "You'll pay for killing my father, Stark," he snarled, still trading blows with Robb. "He was a great man and you." "I did what I had to do," Robb gritted, blocking a savage thrust. Sparks flew. "He came at us in the Whispering Wood, tried to crush the Riverlands. It was war," Jaime spat. "And this is war. No quarter for you, boy." He feinted left, blade whirling. Robb barely parried in time. Ned urged his horse closer, raising his own sword. Jaime spotted him and let out a harsh laugh. "You as well, Lord Stark? Thought you'd had enough of King's Landing. I see they didn't kill you after all. Pity for me." "You have my daughters," Ned said in a low, deadly voice. "Where are they?" Jaime sneered. "Safe enough for now. If you want them to stay that way, you might want to stop swinging that sword." Rage flared in Ned's chest. He lunged forward, but Jaime, ever quick, parried and angled away. The Great John aimed a blow from the other side, which Jaime also managed to deflect, though it staggered him. Robb thrust from above, and Jaime twisted, letting the blade scrape along the edge of his pauldron. Sparks rained. Grey wind sprang with a snarl, but Jaime's horse reared, hooves flailing, forcing the direwolf to back off. Jaime's retinue joined the fray, clashing with Bolton men and Karstark riders who tried to break through the line. For a moment, the entire street was a mass of struggling bodies, screaming horses, and flashing steel. Ned could see that Jaime was outnumbered, but his skill kept him alive, striking with terrifying speed. At one point, Jaime knocked Robb's sword from his hand. Robb twisted aside, yanking a dagger from his belt, but the blow that might have landed never came. Jaime was forced to pivot and defend himself from two Umber soldiers pressing on him. Robb retrieved his sword and Ned guided his horse closer, trying to close off Jaime's escape route. But the chaos was overwhelming. One of Jaime's knights slammed Ned's mount from the side and Ned had to fight not to tumble off. Pain shot up his bad leg. By the time he regained control, Jaime and his guard had managed to pull back a few dozen yards, forming a new defensive line near a narrow side street leading up toward the Red Keep. "If you want your daughters alive," Jaime called, breath ragged from combat, "turn back." Then, with a gesture to his men, he began a fighting retreat, inching further uphill. A hail of northern arrows forced them to shield themselves, but the vantage of the ascending street offered them some cover behind stone walls. Robb cursed under his breath, chest heaving. The Greyjoy's face was red with rage, but he looked to Robb and Ned, uncertain whether to press forward or heed Jaime's threat about the Stark girls. Bolton's men rushed in from behind, panting and carrying bloodied weapons, hungry to finish the job. Ned's fists clenched around his reins. Jaime's words were an obvious ploy to buy time, to shield the Red Keep behind the threat to Sansa and Arya. But what if they advanced and the Lannisters responded by executing the girls out of spite? Ned's eyes darted to Robb, saw the conflict raging behind those blue-gray eyes. "We have them on the run," the great Jon growled. "Let's end this." Robb hesitated, glancing at Ned. "Father." Ned's voice trembled with the weight of his anguish. "We must be certain the girls won't be harmed." He glared at the place where Jaime had vanished around a bend. "But we can't let Jaime fortify the Red Keep or we'll lose our chance entirely. If we linger, the city might rally around him. The gold cloaks might regroup." While they debated, horns blasted from somewhere north of their position. The Riverlanders had evidently broken through their gate as well, or perhaps the Tyrells to the south. Shouts echoed in the distance, some sounding triumphant, others panicked. The entire city was descending into bedlam, and the Red Keep stood at the center of it like a great red fortress of fear. At last, Robb steeled himself. "We move on. If we halt here, we gain nothing. Jaime will not spare them out of the goodness of his heart. The only way is forward, to seize Joffrey or Cersei and force them to release my sisters. We must keep pushing." Ned nodded, though the fear in his stomach turned to ice. "Aye, but we must proceed carefully. Try to flank Jaime's men from multiple streets. Don't charge blindly." Bolton, who had arrived to overhear, nodded in his reserved way. "We'll spread out. Some will press the main street, others will move through side alleys. Lannister lines won't hold if we encircle them." They formed up again, driving onward. The battered gold cloaks who had not joined Jaime either surrendered or fled deeper into the city, leaving the northern vanguard free to climb the sloping streets that led to the Red Keep's outer walls. In the distance, the fortress loomed, its high towers and ramparts dark against the morning sky, parted now by drifting smoke from fires below. The further they went, the more resistance stiffened. Barricades had been thrown up in narrower streets. Boiling oil cascaded from windows in a few places. Men with crossbows lurked on rooftops, picking off stragglers. Bolton's men advanced with cold ferocity, dispatching or scattering these pockets. Still, progress was slow and bloody. Sometime around midday, they reached a wide courtyard halfway up the hill. A grand statue of the warrior stood in the middle, cracked and blackened from old battles. Jaime Lannister's force waited there, reinforced by more Lannister guards and gold cloaks. The clangor of steel resumed. Robb led the charge, clashing again with Jaime. This time, Ned was near enough to see the desperation in the Kingslayer's eyes. He had fewer men than the north, and no sign of relief from the other gates. The city was falling, and he knew it, yet he refused to yield. Their blades met in a furious exchange. Jaime hammered at Robb's guard, forcing him back a step. Grey Wind launched forward, but a Lannister spearman struck the direwolf's flank. Grey Wind evaded, snapping the spear in half, then latching onto the man's arm. Screams filled the air. Robb cut down another guard, pivoted back to Jaime. They traded blow for blow, sparks dancing as swords locked. Then Jaime slammed his gauntlet into Robb's face, momentarily dazing him. He raised his sword for a killing stroke. Ned cried out, kicking his horse forward. But the Great Jon reached them first, swinging his warhammer into Jaime's side. Jaime twisted away just in time to avoid being crushed, though the impact sent him stumbling. Robb shook off the daze, thrust his blade, and Jaime barely managed to parry. Blood trickled down Jaime's temple, and he staggered, chest heaving. Another wave of Northmen closed in. "Yield!" Robb shouted, voice raw. "It's over." Jaime spat blood, eyes blazing. "It's never over." He lunged anew, but this time Robb's sword found a gap in Jaime's armor near his left shoulder, slashing deep. Jaime reeled with a cry, dropping his blade as his arm went limp. He collapsed to his knees, gasping. Silence rippled out as Lannister men realized their commander had fallen. Some tried to attack in a fury, only to be cut down by the Great Jon and Bolton's men. The rest threw down weapons or backed away. A ring of northern steel formed around the wounded Kingslayer. Robb stood over him, sword tip at Jaime's throat, chest heaving. Jaime glared up, hatred etched across his handsome features. "Kill me, then," he snarled. "Avenge your father's captivity. Avenge the war. Do it." Robb trembled, blade poised. Ned dismounted with difficulty, approached, heart hammering. He saw how severely Jaime's shoulder bled. Even if they spared him, the man might die without a maester's care. But in that moment, Ned remembered that this man still might know where Sansa and Arya were kept. "No," Ned said quickly. "We need him alive. He might be the only chance we have to protect my daughters." He laid a hand on Robb's shoulder, gently easing him back. Robb's eyes, bright with fury, flickered to Ned. Then he lowered his sword. Bolton's men rushed in, seizing Jaime, binding his arms. The Kingslayer coughed, face pale. "Fine," he muttered through clenched teeth. "You'll wish you'd killed me. I'll see you all in the Seven Hells." "Where are Sansa and Arya?" Ned demanded, voice hoarse. "If you want a chance at life, or a maester for that wound, you'll tell me." Jaime's jaw clenched, and for a moment, Ned thought he would refuse. But the man's bravado cracked slightly under the pain. "Last I heard," Jaime said, each word like broken glass, "the Queen had them taken to Maegor's Holdfast, possibly the dungeons or some tower chamber. I'm not her jailer. Ask Cersei if you want details." Ned's fists balled. "Then we go to the Red Keep. Keep him alive, see if we need him." Robb nodded, turning away. Gray wind trotted up, blood streaking his fur, but alive and eager. Robb sank a hand into the wolf's ruff, murmuring soft words. The Great Jon roared for the men to gather. Fresh impetus seized the northern host. Jaime was captured. The path to the Red Keep lay open, if only they could breach its final walls. Gritting his teeth against the ache in his leg, Ned remounted. They pressed on, leaving Bolton's men to secure Jaime and keep the route behind them clear. News that the Kingslayer was taken again spread swiftly, bolstering northern spirits, demoralizing whatever remained of the city's defenders. The approach to the Red Keep's walls was lined with battered fortifications, but many gold cloaks now threw down their arms rather than die for a lost cause. Some cried that they had been forced to serve Joffrey, that they would open the gates if it meant mercy. Within the hour, the northern vanguard reached the barbican of the Red Keep. A final knot of Lannister loyalists held the portcullis, though the gate behind them was locked. The Great Jon shouted a savage war cry, leading men to ram the barricade. Arrows pelted down from the ramparts, but the allied archers returned fire. Ned, shielding his face with a thick shield, spurred his horse under the stone archway. The bolt of a crossbow thudded into the shield's center, jolting him. He gritted his teeth, pressing onward. Another wave of men shoved aside the last defenders. Then, with a shriek of iron, the battered portcullis came crashing down in a twisted heap as Umber men cut the chain. A volley of arrows from the northern side cleared the battlements. Robb led a surge inside the keep's outer courtyard. Another ring of defenders formed, but they were clearly outnumbered, their eyes wide with fear. At the sight of the direwolf, some panicked and threw weapons aside. Robb's cavalry thundered across the yard, scattering men. Ned followed, scanning the balconies and windows for any sign of Joffrey or Cersei. The main doors into the keep stood half shut, men in Lannister colors desperately trying to hold them closed. Another ram was brought forward, though smaller, and the battered doors quickly gave way. The wave of northern steel spilled into the grand entry hall of the Red Keep, a place once polished and shining with marble floors, gilded columns. Now it was a battlefield. Gold cloaks, Lannister guards, and a smattering of knights formed a last stand around the base of a wide staircase leading up to the throne room level. Shouts echoed across the vaulted ceilings. The ring of swords on marble was deafening. Robb spurred his horse inside, but it shied on the slippery floor, so he dismounted, leading men on foot. Gray wind bounded ahead, snarling. The Great John bellowed encouragement, hacking down a knight who tried to bar their path. Ned stayed close to Robb, blade ready, though his legs screamed with pain. He watched as the last few Lannisters in the hall broke and ran up the stairs. The northern soldiers followed, some brandishing torches or swords. One figure lay on the marble steps, moaning, a Lannister captain clutching a gut wound. Ned paused, leaning over him. "Where is the queen? Where is Joffrey?" he demanded. The man could only groan in agony, offering no answer. Ned grimaced and moved on. At the top of the stairs, the corridor branched. One way led toward the throne room. The other stretched off to the Tower of the Hand, and beyond that, Maegor's Holdfast. Ned's heart pounded. "Robb, we must get to Maegor's Holdfast. That's where he said they might be." Robb nodded. "You go, father. I'll take half the men to secure the throne room. If we capture Joffrey or the queen there, we can force them to yield your daughters. But if they're truly in the Holdfast, you must be the one to reach them." Ned exhaled in relief, the notion that his son would guard him from behind. Agreed. Quickly, they divided their forces. Ned, supported by the Blackfish, Lord Serwyn, and a contingent of 50 men, turned toward the Holdfast. The Great John, Bolton's second-in-command, and others followed to ensure the corridors behind them were cleared. Robb, the Great John, and the bulk of the troops pressed on toward the throne room, aiming to corner any highborn Lannisters who had not fled. Blood trailed along the polished floors, footprints leading from desperate defenders who retreated. Torches flickered in sconces, sending dancing shadows across tapestries depicting Targaryen kings. At one intersection, a line of gold cloaks barred the way. The Blackfish led a swift assault, hooking a spear under a shield, toppling the guard. The rest yielded or died. Ned pushed onward, mind fixed on his daughters. They reached a small bridge that spanned a narrow pit of water, the moat dividing Maegor's Holdfast from the rest of the castle. 2 gold cloaks guarded it, but at the sight of the onrushing northerners, they fled. Ned's men dashed across, then hammered at the locked gate on the other side. Axes swung, splinters flew. Soon, the gate burst open, revealing a cramped courtyard inside the Holdfast walls. A scattering of red and gold livery men tried to form a shield wall, but the northern wave rolled over them. Those who did not drop their weapons were cut down in short order. Ned advanced, eyes darting across the stone courtyard. A flight of steps led to the tower that housed the royal apartments, the queen's chambers, and various cells. He clenched his sword. "Check every door," he called to his men, voice echoing. "Find them." They split up. Some battered down side doors, others methodically advanced up the main tower steps. Screams and clashing steel rang from every corner. A few leftover defenders attempted ambushes from behind archways or tapestries, only to be dispatched. Ned felt a coldness settle in him. This was the place that might hold Sansa and Arya, and he would kill any man who stood in his way. He limped up the steps with Serwyn and the Blackfish on either side. They kicked open a tall door leading into a corridor of plush red carpets and gilded paneling. A candelabra had been overturned, flames licking at the curtains. Servants shrieked and darted into side rooms. Soldiers in stark colors poured in, swords at the ready. Doors were flung open, revealing lavish bedchambers, dressing rooms. Some were empty, others contained trembling ladies-in-waiting who cowered, holding out their hands for mercy. None were Sansa or Arya. Onward they went, deeper into the corridor. Ned's breath came harsh. Another door, locked, Serwyn's men hacked it open. Inside, a lavish solar, empty except for the smell of spilled wine. Another corridor, narrower, leading to heavy oak doors. Ned recognized these from his time in the castle, remembering that some were prison cells for highborn captives or hidden storerooms. He urged his men faster. A pair of Lannister guards jumped out from an alcove, swinging halberds. The Blackfish neatly disarmed one, stabbed him in the gut, while Ned blocked the other's blow with the edge of his shield. Serwyn battered the guard's helmet with a mace, sending him crashing to the floor. They kicked the bodies aside, rushed forward. At last they reached a thick iron-bound door, reminiscent of a cell. Ned tried the handle. Locked. He stepped back, letting his men strike it with axes. The wood was too strong for a quick break. "Push," Ned growled, voice shaking. The men rammed it in unison, and the frame shuddered. From inside, he heard a muffled cry, a girl's voice? Redoubled efforts. The second blow cracked the heavy timber. The third caved it in. Splinters scattered across a small antechamber lit by a single torch bracket on the wall. Inside, Ned saw two smaller doors, both closed. A steward's body lay in the corner, presumably struck by stray arrows or swords. No sign of immediate defenders. Ned rushed in, heart pounding. "Sansa! Arya," he called, voice raw. He went to the first door, tried it. Unlocked. He flung it wide. Empty, just a table, a chair, a half-eaten meal. The second door was locked from inside. He pounded. "Arya?" "Sansa," a frantic voice answered, quivering. "Father." Relief nearly felled Ned where he stood. He slammed a shoulder into the door, calling for help. Serwyn's men forced it open. Inside crouched two figures in cloaks, clutching each other, Sansa and Arya. They looked up, eyes huge, faces streaked with tears and dirt. Arya had a wooden practice sword in her hand as if ready to defend her sister. Sansa was trembling violently, one arm around her little sister. Ned staggered in, dropping his shield and sword. "Oh, my sweet girls, thank the gods!" Sansa cried out, stumbling forward. "Father!" She flung herself into his embrace, sobbing. Arya hesitated, tears brimming, then launched herself as well, hugging them both. Ned wrapped his arms around them, eyes wet with relief and gratitude. The men behind him lowered their weapons, letting the family have a moment, though the clash of steel and the roar of flames in the background reminded everyone the battle still raged. Ned stroked his daughter's hair, voice choked. "You're safe now. Gods, you're safe." Arya's tear-streaked face glowed with fierce relief. "We heard fighting. They said the North was here. They locked us in. Some guards wanted to hurt us, but the Queen said we were important hostages." Sansa wept openly, her arms clinging around Ned's neck. "We thought you were dead. Joffrey told me you'd been executed, but then we heard rumors you were alive, that you'd forced an exchange with Jaime. Then Jaime came back, furious. He said everything was lost if the city fell. I didn't know what to believe." Ned held them gently, pressing a kiss to each brow. "We've come for you. We'll keep you safe. Robb is here, the entire northern host. The Lannisters' hold is broken." The Blackfish, standing in the doorway, allowed himself a faint smile at the reunion. But footsteps pounded behind them. Serwyn turned, raising his sword. A northern soldier came in, breathless. "My lord, we've taken all the corridors. The holdfast is ours. No sign of the Queen or Joffrey. They must have fled or are in the throne room." Ned nodded, guiding his daughters forward. "We'll get them out of here. Then we'll find Robb and see if the city is fully secured." Arya's eyes were full of steel. "Can I have a real sword now?" she asked, voice trembling with leftover adrenaline. Ned almost laughed through his tears. "Later," he whispered, brushing a tear from her cheek. "First, let's get you both to safety." They exited the antechamber, escorted by Serwyn's men, heading back down the corridor. Sansa leaned on Ned's arm, still shaking, while Arya clung to his cloak, glaring at every corner as if expecting Lannister guards to jump out. At the stairs, a cluster of northern soldiers parted to let them pass. Sansa's breath caught when she saw so many armed men, but they quickly recognized the Stark girls, nodding in relief. Outside, the courtyard of Maegor's Holdfast was calmer now. The last pockets of resistance had been subdued. Some men rummaged through crates or opened storerooms, searching for valuables or fleeing enemies. Ned motioned them to let him pass with the girls. They headed back across the small bridge, re-entering the main keep. As they did, the echo of horns reverberated again, a different note, triumphant. In the hallway beyond, they encountered a group of Stormland knights led by a tall man bearing Renly's sigil. He gave them a respectful bow. "We're sweeping the castle, Lord Stark. Word is the throne room has fallen. King Renly stands within, demanding Joffrey appear or surrender." Ned stiffened. The possibility of Renly crowning himself on the Iron Throne right this moment was high. "What of Joffrey?" he asked. "Not found yet," the knight said. "Some say he's fled to the dungeons or hidden behind the Kingsguard. The small council chambers were deserted. Possibly the Queen took him to the royal sept or somewhere secret." An uneasy feeling twisted in Ned's gut. He glanced at his exhausted daughters. Sansa still looked half in shock, and Arya's face was set in a rigid scowl. He had them back, safe at least for the moment. "I must find Robb," Ned told the knight. "Stay alert. If you see the Queen or Joffrey, Do not let them escape. They must be held accountable for all they've done. The knight nodded, spurring his men onward. Ned and his escort guided Sansa and Arya down the corridors. In the distance, they could hear men cheering, footsteps echoing, the clank of armor. Soon they reached the top of the main staircase again. The fighting in the grand entry hall had died down. Lannister banners had been torn from the walls, replaced with a haphazard mix of stag and dire wolf sigils. Bodies had been moved aside, leaving a wide path. Northerners and Stormlanders alike roamed about, some binding wounds, others sifting through spoils. They made their way to the throne room's towering doors, which stood ajar. Within, they heard raised voices and the rumble of many men. Ned paused in the doorway, eyes adjusting to the dimmer interior. The Iron Throne loomed at the far end, a twisted mass of melted blades. A throng of armed men crowded the hall. Renly stood near the throne, Marjorie at his side. Robb was there too, along with the great Jon, Bolton, Edmure Tully, and other lords. Several gold cloaks lay prone, disarmed, while a few knelt with heads bowed. Torches guttered in sconces, giving the vast space a flickering light. The moment Ned entered with Sansa and Arya, a hush fell. Robb whipped around, eyes widening with joy and relief at the sight of his sisters. He strode toward them, pushing through the crowd. "Sansa! Arya!" he exclaimed, voice cracking. They flung themselves into his arms. The great Jon let out a mighty cheer, and some of the Northerners echoed it. Men parted to let the girls through, patting them gently on the shoulders or offering relieved smiles. Ned moved to Robb's side, resting a hand on his son's arm. The father and son shared a moment of profound relief. "They're safe," Ned murmured. "We found them in the holdfast." Robb nodded, blinking rapidly. "Thank the gods. Father, the city is ours. Renly's men hold the southern gates, Tyrell men hold the eastern. The gold cloaks surrendered in droves once we got inside. Only pockets of resistance remain." Renly approached, face alight with triumph. "Lord Stark, your victory is complete. We have taken King's Landing. Now it's time to restore order and to secure the realm's future." His gaze flicked to the Iron Throne behind him. Men shouted in approval or muttered among themselves. Some of the Stormlanders and Tyrell knights knelt, proclaiming, "Long live King Renly." Others remained uncertain. The northern lords did not kneel, though they observed a respectful silence. Sansa, wide-eyed, gazed at the monstrous throne of swords, the seat she had once dreamed would be hers if she married Joffrey. Arya stared at it with something like disdain. Ned stepped forward, leaning on his cane, voice echoing in the hall. "We have removed the Lannisters from power. That was our chief goal, along with saving my family. Now we must decide what comes next. The realm is in disarray. War has torn the Riverlands. The Westerlands remain unbowed. Stannis Baratheon stands ready with a fleet. And the North has paid a high price in blood." Renly nodded, though he cast a wary glance at the northern lords. "I propose we claim the throne in the name of the rightful king, myself, and unite the realm once more. You, Lord Stark, can remain Warden of the North with broad powers. The Riverlands can be placed under your joint protection. We will hold the Lannisters accountable for their crimes, and peace will be restored to the Seven Kingdoms." The great Jon snorted, crossing his thick arms. "And if we prefer a king of our own in the North? We lost many good men in these battles." A charged silence descended. Robb's face remained neutral, though Ned sensed how the question resonated with him. Had they not heard the lords chanting, "The king in the North," only weeks ago? The memory of that lingered, and Ned saw glances from Karstark, Serwyn, others who might advocate for northern independence. Renly's gaze flicked among them, carefully hiding any annoyance. "We are allies. I have no desire to forcibly subjugate the North. But the realm is stronger united." He gestured around the hall. "We can rebuild, share resources, ensure prosperity. This is what my brother Robert would have wanted, one realm, though free of Lannister corruption." Sansa stood quietly, holding Arya's hand. She peered at Ned, uncertain, as if afraid to speak. Arya's eyes flicked between Renly and her brother, clearly uninterested in kings aside from her own family's safety. Ned glanced at Robb, then at the northern lords. "We need time," he said, measured. "Time for the lords of the North to consult, to decide whether to remain in the Seven Kingdoms. But we can declare an immediate cessation of hostilities with House Baratheon and House Tyrell. Let us first secure the city, see to the small folk who have suffered, release any prisoners in the dungeons who were wrongfully held." Renly's mouth curved into a small smile. "Of course. We must restore order. The city is near riot as it is. The small council is gone or in hiding. The coin vault might be nearly empty given the Lannisters' spending. We'll have a great deal of work to do." Robb exhaled. We'll help maintain order so long as no Northman is asked to kneel to your crown just yet. Our men will depart once we confirm the Lannisters' threat is ended and once Father and I are sure the realm won't be used against us." Renly's eyes flickered with something disappointment. "As you say, together we ended the Lannister tyranny. Let us not sour this victory. We'll forge a new era, step by step." He turned, gesturing to his knights. One knelt, offering him a crown shaped like golden antlers. Renly took it, glancing around as if expecting the entire hall to cheer. Some did, primarily Stormlanders and Tyrells. The Northmen remained politely silent. A swirl of events followed. Word spread through the city that Joffrey had vanished, perhaps taken by Cersei to some hidden passage. Men searched the Red Keep, the Royal Sept, the lower dungeons. Jaime, still in custody, refused to say anything more, though a maester had been fetched to tend his wound. Other Lannister loyalists were rounded up or swore fealty to the new regime. Meanwhile, the battered populace stumbled out of their homes, trembling before the many armed men in their streets. Renly declared a general amnesty for the small folk who had served the crown, instructing his knights to keep the peace. Ned, Robb, Sansa, and Arya found temporary quarters in what had once been the Queen's apartments. Sansa balked, but Ned insisted the space was secure, ringed with northern guards to prevent any threat. As soon as they were settled, Arya demanded to see the rest of the castle, but Ned forbade it. He wanted them both under watch until the city was fully pacified. The memory of nearly losing them tightened his chest. Alone with his family for the first time since the war's start, Ned sank into a chair, letting exhaustion claim him. Sansa cried softly in a corner, the shock of their ordeal now fully dawning on her. Arya paced, full of restless energy, but occasionally she would scurry to Ned's side as if to ensure he was real. Robb stood by a window, gazing out at the city's rooftops and the drifting smoke. "We found you," Ned said quietly to the girls, voice rough. "And we'll go home soon, once all is settled." "Home," Sansa repeated, tears on her lashes. I didn't know if we'd ever see it again." Arya's lips tightened. "I want to leave the city forever." Ned reached for her hand, giving it a squeeze. "Soon," he promised. Robb turned from the window, expression grave. "Father, there's so much left to do. Jaime is in custody, but I doubt Cersei or Joffrey will just disappear forever. We might need to hunt them down or track them if they fled. Renly already has men scouring the city. Also, the Westerlands remain loyal to the Lannisters. We could see more fighting." Ned sighed, nodding. "A war doesn't end just because the capital changes hands. But at least we have you both safe," he said, looking at Sansa and Arya. "That was always our first task." Robb's posture relaxed slightly. "Aye, that's something even Renly cannot take from us." A gentle knock at the door signaled the arrival of a northern guard, announcing that Ser Brynden Tully waited outside, needing to speak about the city's security. Ned rose with a grimace, helping Sansa settle on a cushioned seat. She was exhausted, eyes rimmed with tears. Arya remained close to her side. With quiet reassurances, Ned and Robb stepped into the hallway, leaving a pair of loyal men to guard the girls. The Blackfish waited, wearing a newly donned surcoat that still bore stains from battle. He inclined his head. "My lord, your grace," he said to Robb, using the same honorific some northern lords had begun adopting. Robb lifted a hand, half embarrassed. The Blackfish continued. "The city is near chaos. Flea Bottom is in uproar, some trying to loot Lannister storehouses. Renly's men are trying to keep order, but they'd appreciate our help. Also, there's talk that Joffrey's presence might be hidden in the dungeons under the Red Keep. Others say he and Cersei disguised themselves and fled." Ned rubbed his brow. "We have to ensure he isn't gathering men for a last stand or, gods forbid, something like wildfire. If the city is truly in our hands, we must be sure no hidden stash of wildfire remains that could destroy everything in a final, desperate gambit." Robb's jaw tensed. "Let's lead some of our men into the dungeons, systematically search. If Joffrey or Cersei is down there, we'll find them. Grey Wind can track them if they're nearby." The Blackfish agreed. "Very well. Also, there's the matter of Renly's coronation. He wants a formal ceremony soon. Possibly he'll use that platform to declare the Lannisters traitors and call on the realm to submit. The question is, do we attend?" Ned considered that. "We'll attend as a courtesy, but not as kneeling vassals. We'll stand aside if he crowns himself. Let him proclaim to the rest of the realm that he is king. The North can decide its own path in time." Robb nodded, grateful for that stance. He had enough on his mind without complicating it with immediate talk of bending the knee. They parted ways with the Blackfish, each heading to see to their duties. Robb took a contingent to the dungeons, accompanied by Grey Wind. Ned remained to coordinate with Tully and Bolton men on city patrols, ensuring the gold cloaks fully disarmed themselves. Meanwhile, rumors flew. Joffrey was dead in a gutter, Cersei had fled with Varys. A group of Tyrell knights had found the Hound, alive or dead depending on the teller, and so on. By the day's end, the Allied leadership concluded that Joffrey was gone. No trace of him surfaced in the dungeons. A few cowering servants claimed to have seen him vanish with the Queen and a handful of personal guards through a secret passage, presumably one of the many that riddled the Red Keep. Where they led was anyone's guess, maybe to the city's outskirts or the river or the old catacombs. With darkness falling, the hunts began. Patrols combed the streets, shutting down any attempt at riots or Lannister loyalist uprisings. The smell of ash lingered, but the city's greatest fires had been doused. Renly declared himself king of the Undulls, the Royner, and the First Men in a swift, somewhat improvised ceremony in the throne room that evening. Tyrell lords crowed their support. Stormlander knights cheered. Ned stood with Robb at the back, quietly observing. He thought of Robert's coronation, that boisterous day after the rebellion, and a pang of nostalgia struck him. Now they had yet another southern king, while the North's fate remained in flux. But he had his daughters, and Robb, battered but unbroken, was by his side. The war was not over, but for House Stark, the greatest victory had been achieved. Family restored, hostages freed. Tywin Lannister was gone, Jaime and the city both captured by the North, and Joffrey in flight with no crown to call his own. As he stood in that throne room full of flickering torches, Ned thought of how quickly the world could change. Only a few moons ago he'd languished in a dungeon. Now he watched a new king ascend to the Iron Throne. Yet the North might yet rise as its own kingdom. Time would tell. In the corridor outside, he found Arya waiting for him, half hiding behind a pillar. "Father?" she asked, eyes wide. "Can we go home now?" He knelt, painful though it was, and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Soon, little one. Soon." She nodded solemnly, though her lower lip trembled. Ned wrapped her in a hug, and she buried her face against his neck. Sansa appeared from behind another pillar, face still pale, uncertain. Ned beckoned her close and hugged her as well. "You're both safe," he whispered. "We'll return to Winterfell when we're able." Behind them, Robb emerged, wiping sweat from his brow. "Father, the city's secured, for now. Our men are posted at every gate. Renly's men handle the rest." Ned stood, guiding his daughters along, one arm around each. "We'll do what we must, Robb. Help these Southerners keep the peace until we can safely depart. And if Joffrey or Cersei appear, we'll handle them. But after that, I want to bring my family home." Robb's gaze met Ned's, and for a moment, father and son shared a quiet understanding. Their purpose here was done, as far as House Stark was concerned. They had started this war to free Ned, then to free the girls. They had killed Tywin Lannister, broken the Lion's power, upended the court in King's Landing. Now all that remained was to chart the North's future, whether to remain part of this realm under Renly's rule, or to reclaim the title of king in the North. That choice would come in its own time. For now, they had accomplished the impossible. Ned squeezed Sansa and Arya gently, leading them forward. Robb accompanied them, Grey Wind padding close. Behind them, the halls of the Red Keep flickered in torchlight, battered by war, but at least for a moment, echoing with something like hope. They had emerged from darkness into a new dawn, and though the days ahead might be uncertain, House Stark stood united once more, undefeated and unbroken. And that, Ned thought, was enough.